Good morning, wonderful people of the internet. Welcome to the ASTROLABE, the number one afternoon morning show on the internet with the best live chat that I've ever seen. You guys are in here just consistently dropping bangers, keeping me entertained. That's half the reason why doing this show every day is so much fun. Thanks to all of you who show up in here. Do me a favor, there's 28 watching right now and 15 likes. Let's keep those likes up. I'll be here giving you stories and funny videos and wild rants, and you give me likes. That's the deal here. Also, you can give me some money as well if you'd like. I will shamelessly shill for money. You can give me a super chat here on YouTube. Become a channel member of the King Pilled, or you can go to the King Pilled Discord and become a member there. Go to kingpilled.com to sign up. You'll want to do that today because we have the Schizo Stream tonight. The Schizo Stream is one of the biggest draws, it seems. And we're going to be doing it tonight around 8 p.m. Central. So if you'd like to be a part of that, then join the King Pill Discord at kingpilled.com. Patrick says, watching the show for the first time on a TV and not my phone. Matt's face in 4K is beautiful. That makes me feel kind of weird. Someone posted a screenshot I saw yesterday of them kicked back watching. Actually, a couple people did this yesterday. Of them kicked back watching my face on their wall. And I look basically exactly the way that I do right now because I think I was wearing the same thing. And man, that just feels weird. It feels weird seeing myself hanging on someone's wall. But I appreciate you guys watching. One other thing I want to point out to you guys in the spirit of shamelessly shilling is for those of you who are on Twitter on a regular basis. I think this is it. Yeah. Note this little button right here. I have one up here. A bunch of other people do. Your favorite tweeters, your the best posters that you follow, that you enjoy. If they have a tip button, send them some tips. You can send Bitcoin. You could send Venmo, and it works. Someone already tried it. They used it. It worked. I'd set it up a long time ago and then kind of forgotten about it. But it's really cool, actually, that Elon has integrated Bitcoin tipping through Twitter, and then there's also Venmo here if you want to send something that way. But feel free to support me or the people who are better than me. There are other posters out there. I don't see a lot of people shouting out their tip bucket. They may not even know it's there. They may not even have it set up. If they don't, hit them up. Tell them to set it up so you can give them some money. We got to support our guys who are out here dropping truth nuggets. Who don't get all the NGO support yet. It's coming. It's going to happen. We're going to have our own NGOs. They're probably not going to be called NGOs. They'll be something else. But they're coming. Until then, we got to support our boys. Jason, over the 2-Bit podcast, has had part 2 of his conversation with Stormy Waters. And I didn't know that it was possible, but part 2 outdid part 1. In order to get it, it's behind a paywall for right now. Go become a channel member at the 2-Bit podcast. And I don't remember which tier it is, but one of his tiers, the video is paywalled right now. I think he's uploaded the edited version. He needed to chop it down. He sent me the raw file and I listened to that last night. Yeah, if you wanted to keep that on YouTube, probably had to get edited down a little bit. There was let's just say there was City of London conversation. Those of you who know, you'll know what we're talking about. But he'll be posting the full unedited version, he said, on probably like Odyssey or something like that. So definitely don't miss that conversation. They build on the first one, talking about the shadow economy, but they actually spend almost the first hour of the conversation not talking about anything related to the economy whatsoever, actually talking about things that are much more fundamental about the way that your mind gets controlled, what a mind is, how we access knowledge, what knowledge is, how we experience it, and the way that polarities that naturally exist in nature are weaponized to form dialectics to keep your mind controlled. So if you want some of those insights, followed up with just laying out more clearly than anybody else that I've seen what exactly is happening right now in this whether you would call it circulation of elites or a war between elite classes or however you see it. All the different players, what's happening with the Fed lowering interest rates, the role of the Fed versus the euro dollar, all of that stuff. basically synthesizing a lot of what we've been talking about here with the PayPal mafia, Silicon Valley sector, what Tom Luongo has been hammering on for at least months, if not years now, regarding the Fed and Jamie Dimon. Just synthesizing all of it and adding in the city of London and our favorite, our greatest ally, the democracy in the Middle East. All these elements all being packaged into one thing. I can't believe that this is just publicly available to us. So go to the 2-Bit Podcast, become a member of if you see the video, it'll tell you something about the shadow economy. If you see that, it'll tell you. YouTube's membership thing is all funky. They make it really hard. Like, you can't access the memberships from your phone. You have to go to a PC, and then like when you're using the PC, then it's like it's not super clear like how to sign up for which one. Like it's such a terrible platform. I'm using it because it's the platform to use right now, and Rumble is a pain in the ass to set up. But I'm just waiting for XTV, because really, like, once XTV is fully rolled out and has all of its features and everything there, that's going to be the place to stream. So if one of these days, all of a sudden you notice that the ASTROLABE is no longer showing up on YouTube, that's because I finally got fed up with it, and I've ported over completely just to X. But for now, I'll be streaming to both of them. Although I will say, I said this before, and I'll remind you guys again, so it's not a surprise when it happens. The end of this month, beginning of next month, from the September 28th to October 3rd, I'm going to be in Seattle visiting family. Haven't seen him in a few years, and my son is going to see some family members he's never met, or some he hasn't met since he was 7 months old. So I will be AFK completely for that period of time. There will be no ASTROLABE, apologies, but hopefully you guys can get through. And I'll see if I can get some. I can't promise anything, but I might be able to get a little extra content put out that I can post in the interim while I'm gone. All right, enough housekeeping and shilling and such. Let's get into the stuff we've got here today. I've got a bunch of different things, a whole bunch of videos. I'm going to read an article, like a Substack post from Nassim Taleb. He's kind of revealed himself to be a bit of a lol cow, but this is his post about intolerant minorities is probably like a what would you call it? I want to say bellwether, but like it was a moment in time where my brain rearranged itself, and I saw the world completely differently after that, and it was a death knell to my libertarianism. So I'm going to read that for you guys here today, and I've got some other good videos, some stuff to laugh at, some white pilling content, stuff to get you guys amped up. But we're going to start off with a funny little anecdote here from Noel Gallagher. My wife is a huge Oasis fan, has been for a very long time, and I've never really been an Oasis guy, just never really, it's not my style entirely. But so I never paid a whole lot of attention to him. But now anything Oasis jumps out at me because of my lovely wife. So Amanda Milius tweeted that. She said, "I'm more appreciative of Oasis by the day."
What really fucking annoys me about books is when you go to a bookshop and you'll see a book. The book will be titled "The Happiness of the Homosexual Squirrel," and I'll say, "What's that book about?" And she said, "Oh, it's about drug addicts." Just like, what the fucking hell is that title then? You know, How to Catch a Hippo. What's that about? Oh, it's about one woman's fucking erotic journey across fucking Eastern Europe. People who write books are fucking idiots. I met a few. They think they're above everybody else. Honestly, you think I'm arrogant? Fuck me, I've met a few authors in my time and just like, really? You wrote a fucking book called The Happiness of the Giraffe. Really?
All right, he could stay. This is a good limey. We can keep him around. Shout out to Braxton McCoy. He highlighted this for me. He said, "Many former unbelievers will recognize this step. Incredible to see it happen on this big of a stage."
And God has now spared my life. It must have been God. Thank you. Not once, but twice. And there are those that say he did it because Trump is going to turn this state around. He's going to turn this country around. He's going to make America great again. And maybe. and we're going to bring back religion into our country. Bring it back.
I've heard from a number of different people that the spiritual impact of this whole experience on Trump is legitimate. Like, it genuinely has affected him. And I how could it not? Especially after all the clips I've played for you guys over the last several days of backstories, him talking when he's younger, things that his family did, the generosity and legitimate charity that they've shown, both his family and him himself. He's already a man of great integrity, great constitution. And there's no way that you couldn't go through an experience like what he's been going through and not have it profoundly affect you spiritually. Like, you think the last several years have impacted you spiritually? He's been the focal point of it all. He has absolutely dominated everything for 10 years. The number one story, the number one name in everyone's mouth every single day. And then he gets shot at. He's had multiple attempts on his life. Not just the two most reported ones, but there's been a bunch of other minor ones that haven't really made the news. Going through all this lawfare and watching the world that he thought existed get completely blown up in his face. Like, that's going to have an impact on a man. Doesn't matter who he is. I've got another clip of RFK talking about this later on. I've got a couple of RFK clips, and I put them together. But RFK talks about Trump's reaction to his first time and how much it's changed his perspective. So we'll get to that here in a little bit. But he's having, when we talk about him having some sort of a spiritual revival, there's many different signs of this. For example, he's now speaking Zoomer.
Walked off. I said, that's debate. You know, they said I'm the GOAT in debates because I had a lot of debates and I became president. And the GOAT means greatest of all time. He's a GOAT. But walked off. I said,
he's listening to Barron. There could be no clearer evidence. Barron is telling him how to speak our language. He's his closest advisor. Dad, go talk to Theo Vaughn. Dad, go talk to Aiden Ross. Dad, go do the podcast circuits. You need to connect with young white men. Tell them that you're the GOAT. The Barron's Memes Twitter account is one of the best. I don't know if Barron's Memes has a. Is it Barron's Memes? There's one of them that's always tweeting Barron memes, and then there's one that I'm pretty sure was revealed in the space that he did on crypto the other night is actually Barron. I don't remember which one it is though, and I may be spreading misinformation. I'm not sure, but I saw some stuff that looked like legitimate reports that this is actually Barron. I'll have to go find that. I didn't plan on talking about that, but it just came to mind, and I'll get confirmation on it, so I'm not out here spreading fake news. So it's funny. I want to be able to speak to a lot of stuff that Stormy said, but I know a lot of you probably haven't heard the conversation yet, and I also have to be careful with talking about some of these things because I do want to keep the YouTube channel as long as I can. But there's obviously a lot of people who are very deeply suspicious of Trump's connection to wealthy dual citizen billionaires. And so when they hear things like, we need to bring back religion, they want to read into that and say, oh, well, this Saturday people religion is what he's talking about. And you just have to really, to maintain that perspective that Trump is just a ready and willing pawn for the Saturday people, to maintain that perspective, you just have to really be kind of intentionally, willfully ignorant. Because there's so much evidence to the contrary. If he's merely just a pawn, just an apparatchik who's someone else has the joystick and he's just making the moves for whatever reason and he's trying to deceive you and yada 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 yada, all the black pillar narratives. He's sure saying and doing a lot of stuff that they're not happy about. That it is kind of interesting to question where these ideas are coming from. Because I don't imagine that he would naturally speak of them in this way. No, not Seventh-day Adventist. I was Seventh-day Adventist. It's not Seventh-day Adventist. You can make a case that it's Seventh-day Adventism is what you get when it is when it's combined with this other group that I'm thinking of. You may also know them as the Tunnel People or the Tiny Hats or the Pinocchio People is another one. I like that. That's a fun conspiracy. The Seventh-day Adventists are secretly running the world. I could really run with that one. I could have a lot of fun with that. I need to write that down because that gives me a really good idea. Seventh-day Adventists running the world. Some of you who are listening may know what I'm thinking of here. The Bagel People. Yeah, there's another good one. So this is a very interesting thing for a guy to say if he's functioning as just the simple extension of the Bagel People.
And to help Americans who are buried in crushing credit card debt under the Kamala Harris economy, we will have a temporary 10% cap on credit card interest rates because they're paying 20 and 25% and they're getting decimated. So it'll be a temporary 10% cap. But look, this is the most... And to help...
Oh, the silence is deafening. He's saying this to an audience of Jews. Donald Trump has come out against usury. I do not have time for you if you are blackpilling. There's price controls. Shut up. Go away. Now, this is an interesting video here that I saw a little while back and didn't think too much of it. And then it came back to mind in this new context, and suddenly I'm thinking about it a little bit differently. So let's play this through here. 1.5 is probably going to be too much. Let's say 1.25. Shout out to Thomas Queries. Some of that cold, hard American cash. $5. He says, shape-shifting lizard people is the traditional terminology. Thank you. Shape-shifting lizard people. So let's see here what Mark Wahlberg has to say, and then I'll follow up with something else.
I mean, look what the Raiders have done, and now what the Knights are doing. I mean, it's incredible. You know, you got F1, you got the Super Bowl. I mean, if you really want to make a splash, I'm hoping to premiere my next film here, and hoping to make lots of films here, and move lots of studios and streamers and everybody here to create new jobs, new industry. I think it's got everything to offer, and it's just a matter of time. Not trying to make it my own Boston. Certainly trying to just bring something to the table when coming to Las Vegas, because Las Vegas obviously it has so much to offer. I think when people hear Las Vegas, they think of the Strip and casinos, which is fine, but 20 minutes away, it's one of the most amazing communities that I've ever been a part of. It's all about faith and family, and it's thriving. The kids are doing fantastic. Yeah. It's very much about family here, which I love. But I wanted to come with something to offer myself, whether it be hopefully bringing the film industry here, right, bringing a factory here to make shoes and apparel, and creating other opportunity and jobs. I want to enrich the community and be a part of something. Like I said, Vegas is so generous. I've been welcomed with open arms, but I absolutely love it here. And I think people are excited about the idea of new industry being created. Everything that we're a part of, we actually own. We invest in. We put hard-earned dollars. This is not something where we put our name on it and we are endorsing something. We get a check if it works great. If not, on to the next. Right. We're building business, and that's why we go and we do the work. I want to be connected to people. I want to find great partnerships, work hard with people. I've never minded going and doing the work. I want to create something. I want to build brands. I want to create opportunity and pass it on to my family. I want to create jobs for other people, and I want to inspire other people who are growing up in situations like mine, where they're feeling like, oh, it's not really possible, but anything is possible.
So, reportedly, Mark Wahlberg is a devout Roman Catholic. He has a rosary app that Catherine Boyle, the American Dynamism chick from A16Z, was just tweeting the other day about how her kid falls asleep to Mark Wahlberg reading the rosary every night. So this is an interesting move. Talking about basically transporting Hollywood away from California to Nevada. One might see this as a form of cultural warfare, attacking one of the central hubs of the existing regime. So I saw this, I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And then I heard this.
And if I pull this off with the help of your governor, a lot of Hollywood will be moving from California, because right now you don't have the land, because you don't have the land. It's owned by the federal government. We're going to open up that land to you. You'll be able to build studio lots and everything else. Millions and millions of Americans will be able to take part in building these clean, safe, and beautiful new communities.
So, this is not Mark Wahlberg just doing a Mark Wahlberg thing. This is Mark Wahlberg working in concert on some level with the incoming Trump administration. Because it's obviously like there's no way that Mark Wahlberg is moving Hollywood to Nevada, and also Trump is talking about moving Hollywood to Nevada, and they're not connected in some way. And not just that, Trump is talking about granting federal land to them to do this. Now, obviously, Hollywood is a hive of scum and villainy. Vegas is a hive of scum and villainy. Combining the two of them is not going to produce a magic, based Christian Hollywood. There could be no such thing. I'm taking the existence of what Hollywood stands to be for granted. Like, it's going to exist. There's going to be a Hollywood for the foreseeable future. But what's happening here is the financial interests behind Hollywood are changing. The future Hollywood under this vision is something that has been bootstrapped and financed by a different set of people than the existing one. There's overlap, obviously, between the two. Once you get high enough, there's naturally going to be overlap among all these things. But I'm looking at this as the political and economic incentives of something like this. Obviously, if you're like, we need to move Hollywood to Vegas, there's no way to view this as anything except for an economic attack on Southern California. We are taking back California, you guys. California is going to be available at a discount very soon. You'll just have to... The reason you're going to get it on a discount is because you're making up the difference in that expense and the cost of dropping commies in the Pacific. But that's a pretty nice price to pay, if you ask me. And it reminds me of Trump's this initiative reminds me of Trump's little thing he dropped last year when he was campaigning about freedom cities, talking about creating a lottery and awarding the charter for 10 freedom cities established on federal land across the United States that are basically like federally granted, private subsidized or privately owned cities, which sounds very Yarvinian to me. We're moving in a very interesting direction, folks. There's going to be a tremendous amount of transition that happens over the next... It could be as little as 18 months, could be more like 5 to 10 years. This is one of the things Stormy talked about with Jason. Things are going parabolic. So imagine the bagel people conversation that we're having would not have even been possible to have like 2 or 3 years ago. And if you'd have asked someone, if we were having a conversation about it, like we'd been like, when is the bagel people conversation going to be public? Just had generally in public, and people are going to be a lot more open about it like they are now. We'd have been like, oh, maybe 10 years, 50 years. This is one of the things Stormy was saying. At some point down there in the future, eventually maybe we'll be able to. And look how much has changed in like 2.5 years. These political narratives and the circles of power can completely dissolve very quickly and recoalesce around something new very, very quickly. When that happens, it creates a time of great instability and chaos and strife. But out of that comes great opportunity. So it's our job to put ourselves in a position to capitalize on that opportunity. Now, I appreciate my wife dropping in here and reminding me that I forgot to make an announcement at the beginning of the show. Today is a very special day. Today is the day that we celebrate Pig Dirk's birthday. Now, who's Pig Dirk, you might ask? Pig Dirk is my son's imaginary friend. He's a pig, as you might imagine, and he's turning 5 today. Today's a very special day because today is the day that Pig Dirk turns 5, and celebrating with him are his wife, Pig She, and his son, Rock Dirk. Rock Dirk is 4. These are the people who follow my son around and keep him company. Pig Dirk has become a mainstay in the family. We get regular updates on Pig Dirk and everything that he's up to. He's a volcanologist, I think, most recently. He's also been a police officer. So yeah, oinks in the chat. If you guys want to wish Pig Dirk a happy birthday, then drop some pig emojis in the chat. Happy birthday, Pig Dirk. Okay. And then I see we got a super chat here, $9.99. More cold hard American cash from Maverick Jones. Thank you, sir. He says, Mr. Kingpilled, I've asked the folks at Old Glory Club this as well. I would urge you to research Matthew North. Died by, and still has videos on BitChute and YouTube up. Interesting. Okay. I saw this on the OGC stream yesterday. So I'm going to make a note of that to see what that's all about. Matthew North and BitChute and YouTube. Appreciate it. I like it when you guys give me little rabbit holes to wander my way down. Look at all the pigs in the chat. Thank you, guys. Hopefully Pig Dirk has a very happy birthday. Yeah, that's where we got the name for Chuck Dirk. Yeah, Charlie Kirk is Chuck Dirk. All right, let's keep it rolling here. So JD Vance is really getting tired of the media shit, and it's funny. So Kamala HQ posts this. Senator Vance, do you have any reaction to the Mark Robinson news? Mark Robinson being our... My son is listening, so I'm not going to say what I was going to say. The Mark Robinson is the black candidate for governor who has no time for the typical black people narratives in the United States. So I don't know exactly what happened with him. I haven't kept up on that particular thing, but JD is right here, walking out here, and there's just a quick clip.
Hi, Senator Vance. Do you have any reaction to Mark Robinson news? Senator Vance?
So she doesn't even finish asking him the question until he's already literally out the door. But the Kamala HQ shamelessly posts this and says, Senator Vance, do you have any reaction to the Mark Robinson news? Vance rushes into other room. And Vance responded. He said, rushes into other room. I was walking to the doctor because one of my kids gave me the plague. My comment on Mark Robinson is that Kamala Harris cast the deciding vote on the Inflation Explosion Act. And because of that, a lot of Americans can't afford groceries. I cannot get enough of these guys just dropping their nuts across the forehead of these shit libs. One of my kids gave me the plague. He is in dad mode. He's here running from thing to thing. He's exhausted, and someone posts something going after him, and he's like, I'm just going to absolutely dunk on you right now. I'm teaching my son new phrases. I'm just waiting for the shrieking libs to complain about him abusing his kids or something because he's saying that one of his kids gave him the plague. Nope, he's just a dad. Okay, another funny clip. Joe Lonsdale. This is one of the founders of Palantir, the founder of 8VC, one of the founders or funders of Austin University, the private IDW university that they've founded in Austin. And his background is with the Seasetting Institute. He was the chair for the board, I believe, for the Seasetting Institute way back in the day. So comes from kind of close to the circles that a lot of us came from. And he had this great one-liner yesterday.
It's been an exciting week. Thanks for having me on. I'm here in town working on pager international supply chains and stuff, I think it's kind of fun.
Are you really?
No, that's a joke because of what happened.
Because of what happened. Well, there are people who are saying it was Palantir involved with that.
I mean, if it was, we wouldn't be able to tell you, so. It's been an exciting week.
That was just 3 straight bangers in a row. working on pager supply chains, and then no, that was a joke because of the thing that happened. And then, well, if we were, we wouldn't be able to tell you. Didn't even miss a beat. The guy's a smooth operator. He's also an ardent Zionist. So he's one of these guys that breaks the mold. He's very much extremely pro-Israel on just about everything. But he's also extremely pro-America. And this is why I said that the real differentiator, I think, that to a lot of people may not seem like much of a differentiation, but it's actually a really big differentiation, which is that America exists for the sake of Israel, and America exists, and so should Israel. We need America, and Israel should exist too, versus we need America so that Israel can exist. It may seem like a subtle distinction, but it's actually pretty significant because it plays into this rising coalition forming around the notion that our economic and political interests depend upon a healthy, strong America that is sovereign over its own land and its own industries and is not manipulated by outside forces. So there's I think this is a word, the Z-occupied government. I don't know if I could say that phrase on YouTube, but there's these types of guys like Lonsdale are going to be driven to a decision point because you cannot be both very pro the notion of America existing and being sovereign over its own domain and also be a hardcore Zionist by your own admission. Those two things can't coexist, and they're being forcibly divested from one another right now. So guys like this are fascinating to me. They don't fit into anybody's clean mold. Again, got to listen to the part 2 of the conversation with Stormy and Jason. This is what they spend the first hour talking about. That the dialectics are established to contain you somewhere between them. They're artificially established. They don't actually exist. Those dialectics don't actually exist. There's a whole spectrum and people exist all across on it. So this is an interesting presentation because this is a 28-year-old presentation that was updated in 2010. Now, it's funny watching this and listening to this guy describe this phenomenon here in like a just kind of an ordinary sort of nerdy TED Talk. And the whole vibe of this is it's very boomer truth regime-ish, very naive boomer idealism sort of frame or vibe. But listen to how he talks about this and notice the difference between how a presentation like this would be received right now, what it would say about the person giving that presentation, and what it said about someone giving a presentation like this 15 years ago, how quickly things have changed.
Some people say that mass immigration into the United States can help reduce world poverty. Is that true? Well, no, it's not. And let me show you why. This gumball represents the 1 million legal immigrants that the United States has taken every year on average since 1990. Now, who in the world deserves our humanitarian compassion? The World Bank has one measure of the desperately poor of the world. They make less than $2 a day. And how many people make less than $2 a day in the world? We'll start with Africa. In Africa alone, there are 650 million people who make less than $2 a day. 650 million. And in India, another 890 million people, desperately poor. China adds another 480 million people, making less than $2 a day. And unfortunately, the rest of Asia has a heartbreaking 810 million people who the World Bank says make less than $2 a day. And finally, there's 105 million of Latin America's population that are desperately poor. All told, the World Bank says there are 3 billion people in the world, 3 billion people who are desperately poor, making less than $2 a day. That's 3,000 gumballs. And every year, we take 1 million and suggest that we've somehow made a humanitarian difference. Of course, we don't pull our immigrants from these desperately poor populations, do we? These people are too poor, too sick, too disconnected to make it here as immigrants. We tend to pull our immigrants out of the better off poor of the world. And Mexico tends to define the type of immigrant that we bring here because the plurality of people come from Mexico. And Mexico is poor. how many people in the world live in countries that have average incomes lower than that of Mexico? And the World Bank tells us that that number is these 3 billion plus another 2.6 billion people. 5.6 billion people in the world who live in countries with average incomes below that of Mexico. That's 5,600 gumballs. And so what is it that the elites are telling us? They're telling us that when we take this 1 million immigrants, that we somehow or another are tackling world poverty. And we have to do it regardless of the effect on our unemployed, the working poor, the most vulnerable members of our society, regardless of the effect on our natural resources. Even if we went by the most radical proposals in Washington, which are to actually double our immigration to 2 million a year, which would totally overwhelm our physical, natural, and social infrastructures, we couldn't make a noticeable difference. And we may be really hurting the impoverished people of the world, because the million that we do take are among the most energetic, often the better educated, certainly the most dissatisfied people that, if they did not immigrate, would be the agents for change to improve the lot of all the people in these countries. The true heroes in the global humanitarian field are the people in these countries who have the wherewithal to immigrate to another country, but instead stay in their countries, to apply their skills to help their fellow countrymen. Unfortunately, our immigration system tends to entice these very type of people to abandon their countrymen. The impossibility of making even a dent is actually worse than it looks here. Because last year, when we took 1 million immigrants, these countries added, births over deaths, 80 million more people into the impoverished population. And this year, Congress is bringing in 1 million legal immigrants. And this year, according to the United Nations, these countries are expected to add another 80 million people. And next year, you can be quite sure that Congress, unless stopped by the American voters, will bring in another 1 million immigrants. And these countries, unfortunately, will be adding another 80 million people into these impoverished nations. We could take 5 million a year, but we'd never get ahead of what's happening in these countries. Not in this century. Don't you see? Immigration can never
Look at this guy.
get ahead of what's happening in these countries.
Slack-jawed.
Not in this century. Don't you see? Immigration can never be an effective or significant way to deal with the suffering people of the world. They have to be helped where they live. 99.9% of them will never be able to immigrate to a rich country. There's no hope for that. They have to bloom where they're planted. The only place that 99.9% of these people can be helped is where they live. Let's help them there.
So, again, as I said, this is like a boomer presentation. The entire focus of all of this is look how bad it is for them. Look how bad it is for them. Look how much it's hurting them. Look at how this doesn't make any sense. They say this, but when I crunch the numbers, I get this. It doesn't make any sense. And so this is like one side of the conversation. That side of the conversation actually is probably the most compelling. There's nobody, even the normies, aren't going to have the instinctive, revulsive response to that. Like, oh, no, you can't say that. Because it's being presented as we've been conditioned to believe that we shouldn't care about our own people at all, and we should only care about the people outside of our country, outside of our communities. We should only care about the other. This is like the lib psychology, the virtue signaling of I care so much about everyone else that I'll actually shit all over my own people to show just how much I care about them. And then, so like a narrative like this is like, this is the normie perspective from like 15 years ago. This is where the majority of people still are. So this presentation is actually really powerful to I don't know, probably 60 or 70% of the population. It's just like, whoa, this is insane. We can't have this mass immigration policy because it's hurting all the other countries. And I am perfectly fine with people having that. If that's the reason why people want to support immigration restriction, because it's for the sake of other countries, more power to them. Great. As long as we get the restriction. and the deportations. These people got to go back because they need to build their countries. So we're going to send them out as emissaries to go build their countries. There's so much freaking money flowing around. I am more than happy to pay for them to go back and fund the building of their countries. Let's bring back colonialism. These will be our colonial properties. That's the deal. So it's crazy seeing this. Like now, if this guy was to make this presentation now, if he's even still alive, he would... to go out and make a presentation like that would tell you a lot about where his mind and heart is, because this is so much more controversial to talk about now than it was then. And I looked it up. In 2023, there was just under 900,000 people who immigrated according to official numbers. In 2022, there was 2.2 million people who immigrated to the U.S., according to the official numbers. The peak was 2016. I think it said 2.7 million people. They got to go back, man. We don't have room for them. We don't have the money for them. We need to take care of our own people. See, I don't think that this sort of thing is like completely... is like there's like a fixed answer for every single situation. If we had a super stable, growing, tight-knit community... nation, then sure, let's bring in some of the best and brightest on a selective basis from elsewhere. Let's allow people to apply to come here if they could demonstrate that they're going to integrate with us and bring something of value to the country. Sure, fine, great. But we're not anywhere close to that. We're like decades away from that, maybe more. And so importing a bunch of people doesn't just hurt the countries that those people are being taken from. It also hurts the people here. And this should be the most obvious conclusion. And it's completely, until recently, it's been completely verboten to talk about in public. We need to take care of ourselves. The very boomerishness of this presentation is that you can see sort of the natural conclusion from it is actually we need to be going out and fixing all these other people's countries. Like we need to help them civilize themselves. And there's truth to that, but that's something that needs to be decided on a personal or family basis to go and do that. Not an official policy of the government. This is the government for this country. Our focus is on governing this country and ensuring that the law is enforced here. And then if people from this country want to go do things in other countries, more power to you. It's going to cost you something. And as long as you're fine with that cost, then go for it. But our governments, at this point in time, state, local, city, federal, none of them need to be involved in bringing people into the country, facilitating people coming into the country, or going and fixing up other countries. We need as many resources as possible focused on us and taking care of our home, getting our home in order. $20 super chat from Thomas Queries. Thank you, man. He says there's no return on investment in investing in other countries like Elon did with Brazil. You get nothing there compared to what you can get here, so everybody gives us all their money. The milkshake theory of the dollar. and I, over the next, you got to listen to the Stormy Jason conversation. Like all of us need to be on the same page here. The gems that they're dropping are just a great blessing to us. And we need to be collecting these gems and then coordinating and acting accordingly. Because there's about to be a fire sale on assets, resources. That's the flip side of the collapse. The flip side of the collapse is everything is on sale. So those who are positioned appropriately have an opportunity to massively level up We don't necessarily need to take hundreds of years to build back up. We could build back better in a couple of decades, because the flip side of everything collapsing is everything is on sale. And we can be there to buy the things that are on sale. And I'm not just talking about like hard assets. I'm talking about supply chains, networks, contracts, businesses. All these things are going to be up for sale. And if we're the ones who see it now, if we're the ones who recognize it, if we're, the normies are kind of not completely clued into what's happening, we need to capitalize on the advantage that we have. The time for theory selling is over. The time for action is now. Speaking of collapsing, kind of a sobering thread here. Ryan Peterson at TypesFast on Twitter. He says the biggest wild card in the presidential election that nobody's talking about, the looming port strike that could shut down all East and Gulf Coast ports just 36 days before the election. If the International Longshoremen's Association, or the ILA, goes on strike, tens of thousands of businesses could miss the key Black Friday, Cyber Monday peak sales period. The situation started heating up when the ILA, the union representing 45,000 dock workers at U.S. East and Gulf Coast ports, issued their most serious threat yet on September 4. The union unanimously voted to prepare for an October 1 strike should a contract deal with U.S. Maritime Alliance, USMX, which represents carriers, marine terminal operators, and other area longshore employees, fail to materialize by the end of September. In July, talks at the USMX broke down over automation, wages, and healthcare costs. With tensions running high, the two sides are far from reaching a deal, and negotiations aren't even back on the table. Quote, mark my words, the ILA most definitely will hit the streets on October 1 if we don't get the contract we deserve, end quote, ILA President Harold Daggett said in a recent video speech. That talk is a must-watch for anyone with skin in the game on this issue, most of us in the business world. Daggett is a true character, check out his gold chain, and a real legend in the labor union world. He even participated as a frontline worker in the last ILA strike in 1977, 47 years ago. Just briefly here, this is the guy that he's talking about.
These greedy companies have made the contract we deserve. These greedy companies have made billions in the past few years, especially during COVID.
Not a guy that I think I would want to go to war with. Go to war with, perhaps, but not go to war with. In 2023, U.S. seaport trade totaled $2.12 trillion. If the ILA strikes, U.S. East and Gulf Coast ports, which handle 72% of that trade, would grind to a halt. Analysts say even a one-day strike could take 6 days to recover from. A one-week strike in October, when businesses are rushing to prepare for the holiday season, could create bottlenecks that last until mid-November. And that's not factoring in cargo diversions already happening as a result of the Red Sea disruptions. In the worst-case scenario, a strike that lasts for more than a few weeks or even months could create massive risks for the U.S. economy. Rerouted shipments could overwhelm West Coast ports, creating container pileups, chassis shortages, skyrocketing transport costs, rail congestion, and an air freight market that's already stretched thin. For context, the last time the East Coast saw a strike of this magnitude was 1977. Sure, government intervention is possible, like when President Biden stepped in to prevent a national rail strike in 2022. But this time, the ILA has made it clear, no interference from the administration. President Biden, known for his pro-union stance, faces a tough balancing act between labor and business interests right before the November presidential election. Yesterday, the Biden administration stated they do not plan to invoke the Taft-Hartley Act to break a potential strike. Enacted in 1947, the Taft-Hartley Act allows U.S. presidents to delay strikes that could threaten national security. It's kind of a funny thought. Like, you guys are going to strike. No. I have the authority to say, no, you are not going to strike. Because it threatens national security. Anyways, specifically, the president may enforce an 80-day cooling-off period, forcing employees to return to work while negotiations resume. We've never invoked Taft-Hartley to break a strike and are not considering doing so now, said a Biden administration official. While the administration could still step in at the 11th hour to prevent a strike, it's looking increasingly likely that a strike is becoming all but inevitable. It's possible that this is just posturing by the Biden administration, saying they would intervene to postpone a strike would hurt the negotiating position of the union. So maybe they would in fact intervene, even if they say they're saying they won't. Likewise, it's also possible the two sides are much closer to a deal than either is letting on. Again, in the midst of a negotiation, you can't take everything the parties say at face value. Things are certainly heating up in the meantime. Today, CMA CGM, one of the world's largest ocean carriers, announced new local port charges at destination that will be implemented in the event of a strike. Effective October 11, 2024, these new charges will affect 18 ports on the U.S. East and Gulf Coasts, including some of the busiest ports in North America. Remember, October is the peak season for businesses inbounding goods in preparation for Black Friday and Cyber Monday, which are now about 10 weeks out. If merchants send in inventory mid to late November and expect it to be in stock for BFCM, it'll be too late, or BFCM. If there's a strike that shuts down the East and Gulf Coast for an extended period, all that cargo will have to either move into the country via the West Coast ports or via air freight. The world's air freight network is already running at peak capacity, and anyways, a single large container ship can move about 40 times more cargo per year than a 747 freighter. And there are 10x more large container ships than 747 freighters. The air network simply can't pick up any slack. That leaves the West Coast ports. During COVID, the West Coast ports experienced a 20% increase in container volumes, and they effectively ground to a halt, with hundreds of container ships waiting offshore, and transit times from Asia to the U.S. lengthening from 25 days pre-COVID to 120 days during the worst of the crisis. Moving all the cargo from the East and Gulf Coast ports to the West Coast ports would represent a 122% increase in imported container volumes for the West Coast ports. It's simply not possible. In Daggert's video linked above, he says that one of the things the ILA did in the 1977 strike was show up at the West Coast ports to picket any ships that diverted from the coast to the West Coast. And they were successful in this as the West Coast Union, the ILWU, refused to unload any ships that were originally meant to go to the East Coast and diverted to the West. So the first bottleneck will emerge after the East and Gulf Coast ports shut down will be capacity on ships heading to West Coast ports. As a result, we would expect prices for shipping from Asia to the West Coast to spike almost immediately to levels far beyond the $20,000 peak, 8 to 10x pre-COVID long-run average historical norms. It's anyone's guess how high prices would go, but ocean freight prices are highly inelastic. You don't ship stuff more just because freight prices are cheap, and you don't ship less stuff until they become so expensive that you can't turn a profit on the goods. When capacity is tight, in a competitive market, the price will go to the importers willing to pay the most, those with the best margins. Those with worse margins, furniture and other bulky lower margin goods, will be shut out altogether. As we saw during the 2021 and 2022 supply chain crisis, the ocean capacity itself, with its high prices, will not be the only or even most important bottleneck. The next bottleneck to emerge will be the ability of the container ports to process all those containers. As they unload and start to pile up in the ports, if truckers aren't able to get in fast enough to clear them, they will create traffic jams inside the port that then interfere with the ability of the port to operate at high levels of efficiency. The more volume you pump into the system, the less volume that comes out the other end. This is a queuing problem that can ultimately lead to, I don't know if this is supposed to be like catastrophic system failure. During COVID, one of the biggest bottlenecks was the lack of available chassis. The trailers that trucks use to haul the containers from the port. The bottleneck on available chassis was caused in large part by a bottleneck in the amount of trucking yard storage for those containers. The local zoning laws in Southern California prevented truck yards from stacking containers more than too high. Once the containers got stacked too high across the entire truck yard, a third container couldn't be unloaded from the chassis, and the chassis would then be taken out of commission. These people that run these states are so fucking retarded. If we can get past the bottleneck on ocean capacity, port terminal throughput, chassis, yard storage space, the next bottlenecks to emerge will be in the transload capacity, the ability of warehouses to unload containers and then reload them onto dry van trucks so the goods can be hauled cross-country, as well as rail capacity. And it's not just the ability to get cargo loaded onto the rails that matter, but also to get the containers unloaded at their destination. What we saw during COVID was that with the 20% increase, all these networks broke down. There simply wasn't the ability for such an increase in containers through the logistics network. You may remember that I identified this issue with the zoning laws right here on Twitter, and within a few hours, Long Beach changed their zoning laws. Side note, I'm told this is the fastest response by government to citizen action in the history of civilization. I'm not going to read that whole thing right now. You can go. I'll drop this tweet in the master thread that goes out on Twitter at RealKingPilled. As soon as I finish, I'll put all these links and stuff into a master thread, and you can go follow up on them yourself. From there, the delays are likely to keep shifting as the bottlenecks cascade through the system. For example, ships that are sitting off the East Coast full of containers will not be able to continue on their journey. That means all the containers that they should have picked up at the next ports on their trip will sit there waiting, and the containers they were returning to ports overseas won't be available. So within a few weeks, we'll find that ships aren't showing up where they're supposed to, and there won't be enough empty containers to load cargo overseas, and so on and so forth. The result will be supply chain snarls that make what we saw during COVID look like a walk in the park. Those bottlenecks were highly inflationary, with the price of ocean freight alone contributing up to 3% to goods inflation. All those problems were caused by an increase in demand, ostensibly a good thing. A port strike would be a massive decrease in supply, a very different beast in macroeconomic terms. It would lead to inflation like we've never seen before, and just as Powell has moved to cut rates today, signaling that inflation has been tamed. I'm no political analyst, but it seems to me that a port strike that massively disrupts all businesses that import or export goods just 36 days before the election seems like a huge wild card that almost nobody is talking about. The administration appears unfazed by this. What do you think? Would a strike materially hurt Kamala's re-election chances? Should this be a bigger deal that the Biden administration, or at least the political analyst class, should be taking more seriously? What this sounds like to me is that they know that they've got the administration by the balls. This is a devastating. This is the worst October surprise you could imagine. Absolutely devastating. And what policy proposal did Trump just announce recently? No tax on overtime. How do you think that the unions are going to respond to that? How do you think all the blue collar workers are going to react to that? It doesn't even seem like there's a competition here. The entire Midwest demographic, the demographic that dominates the swing states, has less and less reason to vote for Kamala and more reason to vote for Trump. Because this sort of thing could be fixed just so quickly and easily. And all of the rhetoric coming from the Republican campaign talking about the onshoring of manufacturing, the reindustrialization of America. This is red meat for the swing states. The Kamala campaign is like desperately trying to, oh yeah, us too. Yeah, me too. I don't think it's going to cut it. Let me catch up on some of your guys' comments here. Okay. Andrew says it sounds like a setup for the repeal of the Jones Act. Yeah, very, very likely. Vivek has talked about that at length. Josh Ham says, trust me, Matt, if Trump makes OT tax-free, we can rebuild America way faster than decades. Y'all have no idea how fast we could build if the stupid barriers would be removed. Right. Kate says, wondering if the Houthi airstrikes have anything to do with this, since that's created shipping delays in the Red Sea. I think it's I don't know if it would be directly connected, but at the very least, it's compounding it, and it strengthens their bargaining position here. They've really put the administration in the administration has put itself in just a whole tangled network of lose-lose situations. This is why I was texting my dad about this morning, and I said I think I'm like 60% that Trump wins in the courts, 35% that Trump wins outright on election day, and then 5% that there's some sort of unfathomable chicanery. I think there's just outside of the election fortification narrative that now has become mainstream, that just everyone talks about, that's just admitted openly by both sides. I don't see how you get the necessary number of sequential decisions from individual people to continue pressing forward with this regime narrative as the stakes get higher and higher and higher and higher and higher. It's just, we've already seen people beginning to just capitulate, and they're kind of just ready to turn the page and move on. Just accept that Trump is going to win. And actually recognize, yeah, he probably should. Not because of the surface level political issues, but the fundamental structural issues that have arisen and that there is no plan for. There's no competence around. It's just a whole bunch of crooks running around trying to squeeze their last little bit of fat out of the system, and then just try to hightail it and hope they don't get hopefully don't get grabbed on their way out. All right. So I try to do my best not to give you guys too many Kamala clips because I don't want to watch them. But this one, I want to show you guys this one because of a visual thing here in particular. So this is Kamala at this event with Oprah. And notice how they've framed this. Look how many people are actually here. And look how many people it looks like. Like if you just kind of let your eyes go out of focus and just sort of view it, you're kind of like, oh, there's a pretty big crowd of people there. But then you realize all these little faces up here are just like people like Zoom calling in. And there's really only, what is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 maybe rows of people. And then there's like 4 banks of it. So there's maybe a couple hundred people here, but they're making it look much larger than it is. This is actually a pretty small gathering. But this is like the same sort of thing they did with ABC, like getting her a smaller podium, having the cameras fixed in such a way to subtly make her look better versus him. They're doing these kinds of, like this is what they're reduced to, is trying to amplify her appeal. Now listen to this line that she drops.
We really would love to know what your plan is to help lower the cost of living.
Yeah, first of all, thank you both for being here. And yours is a story I hear around the country as I travel. And in terms of both rightly having the right to have aspirations and dreams and ambitions for your family and working hard and finding that the American dream is, for this generation and so many recently, far more elusive than it's been. And we need to deal with that. And there are a number of ways. One is bringing down the cost of everyday necessities, including groceries.
She is just making it up as she goes along. What was this first line here?
We really would love to know what your plan is to help the cost of
Yeah, first of all, thank you both for being here. And yours is a story I hear around the country as I travel. And in terms of both rightly having the right to have aspirations.
In terms of both rightly having the right to have aspirations, what the hell is she saying? In terms of both rightly having the right to have aspirations and dreams and ambitions for your family and working hard and finding that the American dream is, for this generation and so many recently, far more elusive than it's been, and we need to deal with that. My God. I love that the Trump War Room account is, at this point, they're just like tweeting clips of her. Like, here's our campaign proposals. Here's our campaign ad. Just listen to her talk herself around in circles. As we're tracking this drumbeat with all the polling and voter registration data, a couple from Georgia. Eric Doherty has become a regular here on the show, assistant news director for Florida Voice News, and he's had some of the best data on this, keeping it up to date regularly. In Georgia, there are currently 85% less, it should be 85% fewer, mail-in ballot requests than at this same point in 2020. So far in the 2024 general election, and this is as of 9/20, so as of this morning, so far in the 2024 general election, 149,187 people have applied to vote. At this point in the 2020 general election, that number was 969,740. Total turnout for the 2024 general election is 85% lower. The voting method breakdown is 0 mail ballots and 0 early votes. So, obviously one of the biggest mechanisms for fortification was mail-in ballots. And this trend is carrying across all these different states, that the requests for mail-in ballots are wildly down. And obviously this is, I think, overwhelmingly, this is because the people who requested mail-in ballots did it because of COVID. The majority of them weren't doing it because they wanted to do it. They were just like, oh, well, I don't want to go there. But now COVID's not an issue anymore. So they're like, I don't need to. I'll just show up then. I don't want to have the thing sent to me and try to remember to fill it out and mail it in, whatever. I'll just go day of. This is a huge boost to Trump, and it makes the fortification much more difficult to pull off. Now, that doesn't mean there can't be any fortification, obviously. Prior to 2020, if we were thinking about fortification, we might not have necessarily thought, oh, have a global pandemic that causes a huge spike in mail-in ballots and then have all these ballot harvesting campaigns and everything that went on with it. It's entirely plausible that they're working on some other angle. They don't need the mail-in ballots for whatever angle they're taking this time. I don't think you can completely rule out that possibility. But I don't think that possibility is equally. I don't think that possibility is guaranteed. I don't think you could put money on it as being the thing that's going to happen. There's some unknown scheme out there that they're actually going to employ, and they don't care about the mail-in ballots anymore. This sort of information is part of why I'm leaving. I said 35%. I'm leaving a decent chance, in my own estimation right now, that this genuinely is just a Trump victory outright, straight up. I heard Vivek months ago talking about how we need a Reagan-style landslide, and I was kind of like, okay, yeah, it's nice rhetorically, I suppose, but there's no possibility of that happening. I don't think it's likely that we get a Reagan-style landslide, but I can see now that I could see where he was coming from then, that this was actually possible. So I'd say there's a small chance, like maybe 5% chance that there's a Reagan landslide, but I think that there's a decent possibility that, it's something like a 320 electoral college votes night of. It's just announced, and the will between now and then just drops off so much that there is no fortification to be had, effectively. They essentially just concede the election and go into full-blown obstructionist mode, but they're not actually, it's media narratives, it's not actually legitimate lawfare. I think that there's an increasing possibility of us actually getting something like that, and it would be very jarring if it happened. Like if the night of, or the morning of November 6th, I wake up and it's just everyone's moved on and just accepted, oh yeah, Trump won, and how did this happen, and what sort of horrible things are ahead of us, and whatever. That'll be very jarring. I'll be like a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs, just on edge, waiting for something to happen. Okay. Another thing from Georgia, also from Eric Doherty. Major election modeling channel has forecasted this result for the Georgia 2024 presidential election. The channel nailed both 2020 and 2022 and also expects Trump to win Pennsylvania. So this is as of September 18. What they're projecting is 49.4% to Trump, so a 45,370 vote victory, which for Georgia that's moderately substantial. Relatedly, just saw this morning, just before I went live. The Georgia State Election Board has approved a rule to require election workers to hand count ballots on election night. The vote was 3-2. Yet another instance of the drumbeat. The drumbeat is persisting. It's not going away. At this point, you have to expect more. It's been consistent for months now. All these different cases, all these different initiatives, all these different Supreme Court decisions, everything is continuing to point in the direction of a much more normal election, of 2020 being an outlier election. And I've said before that I don't think fortification is a new thing. I think it's been around for about as long as the country has been around. And I think it's probably been increasingly worse over the last 30 years. 2020 was just the most blatant edition. And I think it's because part of what's so blatant about it for us now is because they literally bragged about what they did. They wrote that Time magazine piece describing in detail how they pulled it off. And I think they did that because they thought they'd won. They were like, we had this great point of crisis and now it's just smooth sailing ahead of us. We got our guy in, and Trump's going to go down. He's going to go to prison, and all of his people are going to be demoralized. And we've got the January 6th thing to bludgeon them with for years now. They were at the end of history. And so they just openly admitted all of it, which ironically then made it so, okay, well, I'm just showing you what they're saying. I'm not even trafficking in conspiracies or anything. What do you not want me to read your media publication? Do you not want me to share your media publication? So they themselves are the ones who seeded the possibility of undermining their own censorship efforts. These are not competent people, folks. They're preposterously incompetent. Another state. Breaking. Oklahoma officials just announced that they've removed 450,000 ineligible names from the voter rolls, including 100,000 dead people and 15,000 duplicate registrations that somehow got pushed into the system. Quote, Oklahoma ensures only eligible voters participate in elections in part by following voter list maintenance procedures provided in state law. Since January 1 of 2021, Oklahoma election officials have removed 97,065 deceased voters, 143,682 voters who moved out of state, 5,607 felons, 14,993 duplicate registrations, and 194,962 inactive voters who were canceled during the address verification process. Inflated voter rolls are on the Mount Rushmore of ingredients of fraud. All you need to cheat in an election are ineligible names, universal mail-in voting, no chain of custody on ballots, and vulnerable voting machines. And don't forget a little bit of corruption on the side. Oklahoma is a red state with 4 million people in it. Numbers like these can easily flip it from deep red to blue overnight. If this is happening there, you can only imagine the problem is 100 times worse in other states.
Since January of 2021, Governor Stitt's office says election officials have removed 453,000 names from the rolls. That breaks down to 97,000 deceased voters, 5,600 felons, 15,000 duplicate registrations, and 195,000 who were removed because they failed to verify their address. Over the last 3 years, officials have also removed 144,000 voters who moved out of state. Thanks to new legislation approved by lawmakers, those voters can be removed as soon as they put down roots in a new state.
We're now able to remove voters automatically if we receive notification from another state that they've surrendered their driver's license in another state.
Since January of 2020,
Armchair Contrarian says, just wait until all the Sean Combs stuff comes out. Kamala aligning herself with pedos. Not a good look. Yeah, that's a story that I've been keeping an eye on. I haven't weighed in on it yet because I don't have much to add to it, but it's certainly something to keep track of. The fact that this is happening right now. Another one was 23andMe's entire board resigned suddenly. The 23andMe, led by Ann Wojcicki, the sister of Susan Wojcicki, and who was the head of YouTube, just died recently. And Ann Wojcicki is married to Sergey Brin. And it's well documented that they used to vacation on Epstein's Island. There's all sorts of funky stuff that's going on right now. All right, let me catch up on some of your comments here. Okay, Colin Rosh was ahead of the story. Okay. Let's move to this one here, talking about Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania Democrats approach 2024 election with slimmest voter registration advantage in decades. Despite Harris bump, the party is still being outpaced by Republicans. Let me zoom this in a little bit. Having the glasses on and being like 5 feet away from my monitor makes it kind of hard to read. Despite a bump following Joe Biden's exit from the presidential race, Democrats in Pennsylvania are entering the home stretch of the 2024 election with their weakest voter registration advantage compared with Republicans in recent decades. The party's raw registration numbers began to rise after Biden dropped out in late July, and that trend is continuing. But simultaneously, the number of Republicans has increased even more quickly. In other words, Democrats' overall share of voters is still declining, and recent increases haven't made up for losses over the past 4 years. The Pennsylvania Department of State makes available voter registration data as far back as 1998. In those 26 years, Democrats have never had as small an advantage as they do now. As of September 16th, Democrats made up 44% of registered voters in the Commonwealth, down from a 2009 high of 51.2%, while Republicans were at 40.2%, up from 36.9% in 2009. Unaffiliated and third-party voters have boosted their numbers even more, from 11.9 in 2009 to 15.7. Republican activists argue their party's rising voter registrant share proves Donald Trump can once again pull off a Pennsylvania victory. Democrats, meanwhile, say they've seen promising trends since Vice President Kamala Harris entered the race, despite their party's still declining share of registered voters. Both parties are holding registration drives ahead of Pennsylvania's October 21 deadline, but they're also focused on another key driver of votes, encouraging turnout among those already registered. Democrats in particular have expressed concern that without strong turnout in vote-rich Philadelphia, they can't win the state. So here's their, you can see their shrinking majority. So back to 2009 was when they had the greatest delta between Democrats and Republicans. And then that gap has been narrowing and narrowing, especially over the past 4 years, basically. At the same time, part of the reason for that gap is an increase in no affiliation or other party affiliation registered voters. But shout out to Scott Pressler. This is a major consequence of the work that he's been doing with voter registration. Same with TPUSA. I don't know if TPUSA has the same presence in Pennsylvania. I know they're much more in Arizona. But shout out to those guys. So experts agree that voter registration is an imperfect measure of political engagement. Laura Putnam, a historian at the University of Pittsburgh who studies election data, called registration noisy because it's affected by factors far beyond current voter engagement and enthusiasm. For instance, she said a big reason why Democrats are currently seeing registration losses is the correction from two enormous past bumps. One was about 60 years ago, quote, at the height of the labor-led industrial immediate post-New Deal prosperity in Pennsylvania, where being a good union member, being a good community member in so many parts of the state meant registering as a Democrat, she said. Another came before and during the Obama administration when engagement among traditionally low turnout voters spiked. That first cohort, Putnam said, largely stayed registered as Democrats even if they didn't keep voting that way. Now, deaths in that generation are reducing their numbers. Similarly, the Obama-era voters are now waning because many were young and have moved, and others have become inactive and are being cleaned from the voter rolls. These two trends form a perfect storm for Democratic registration to dip, but don't necessarily mean actual voting behavior is changing as much as the numbers suggest. Putnam describes the shift as more of a hangover from past engagement patterns. This just sounds like cope to me. When Pennsylvania's October 21 registration deadline fast approaching, or with the registration deadline fast approaching, Republicans have nearly 40,000 more voters than they had in November of 2020. Democrats, on the other hand, are roughly 303,000 voters behind their 2020 status. So on net, Republicans are 343,000 voters plus, and in the plus column with respect to Democrats. Here's some interesting markers here. So let's see. Blue is Democrats, red is Republicans, green is third party or no affiliation. So there was a big spike from Harris becoming the nominee, but there was a correspondingly large spike with Republicans, and then they both dropped off. And now they're both spiking again, but Republicans are spiking much faster and further than Democrats. In election seasons, a slew of registration and get-out-the-vote operations spring up in swing states. Some focus on enrollment, others center engagement. All are trying to respond to a complicated mix of political data, registration trends, issue polling, voting history, census information, and much more. Registration has been a particular focus for Early Vote Action, a national GOP operation. The group is run by Scott Pressler, a longtime conservative activist with far-right ties. In 2017, he organized nationwide rallies with the group Act for America, which criticizes Islam. The group's founder once reportedly said that an observant Muslim, quote, cannot be a loyal citizen of the United States, end quote, and the rallies Pressler organized attract support from white supremacists. Pressler was also involved in Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election results, holding Stop the Steal rallies and calling the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, quote, the largest civil rights protest in American history. Based. But Pressler, see, like, all of this, the stuff that they use to try to slander our guys now just makes our guys sound cool. But Pressler has lately focused his efforts and his national profile on voter registration, particularly in Pennsylvania. He regularly posts updates on the number of voters he claims his organization has registered. Early Vote Action has contractors across the state who set up voter registration tables and other outreach efforts. Using an app, the contractors also instruct volunteers on how to target key voters by sending postcards and texts, door knocking, and making phone calls. John David Longo, Early Vote Action's Pennsylvania director, said the group sometimes runs into difficulties getting voters to trust the election process or agree to vote by mail after years of GOP claims that the system is broken or rigged. But he's also convinced that strong Republican numbers aren't just due to regular registration tides, but are a true expression of sentiment. It's obvious to anyone that Republican voter registration efforts and registration efforts in general are leaning in favor of the Republican Party, said Longo, who is also the mayor of the Western Pennsylvania borough Slippery Rock, a Butler County GOP committee member, and a community college professor. In almost every county, consistently for almost an entire year since January, Republicans have outperformed Democrats in voter registration numbers nearly every month and in nearly every county. But registration isn't the only factor the parties care about. Activists and candidates for both parties are also laser focused on making sure as many eligible voters as possible cast ballots. At a recent outreach event hosted by the South Philly Voter Project, led by Progressive State Rep. Elizabeth Fiedler and Senator Nikhil Saval, volunteer door knockers emphasized turnout. Philadelphia is dominated by Democrats. The city has so few registered Republicans that in local elections, Democratic primaries almost always determine the outcomes of races. This makes the city and its surrounding suburbs crucial sources of votes for the Democratic Party, but it also means that low turnout can be devastating. That's a real concern this year because in both the 2020 and 2022 elections, Philadelphia turnout has been markedly lower than average turnout statewide. In its door-knocking session, South Philly Voter Project targeted Democratic, unaffiliated, and third-party voters who data showed did not consistently cast ballots. The idea, according to coordinator Tamesh Kimraj, is to bolster support as much as possible in dense areas like South Philly using deep canvassing, time-intensive conversations aimed at convincing people to vote. We do effective voter outreach by having our neighbors knocking on their neighbors' doors, said Kimraj, who is also a city committee person and works on Fiedler's campaigns. It's not someone they haven't seen before, but someone next door is saying, hey, I'm a neighbor knocking on your door, letting you know why this is important to us. This would be probably more annoying to me than just having some random person knock on my door. Like, having my neighbor at their behest come over and talk to me about it, I don't know. That would maybe I'm just biased, but that would grind my gears, I think. Putnam, the University of Pittsburgh historian, said there are indeed some genuinely good signs in the registration data for Republicans and bad ones for Democrats. Republicans saw a registration spike when Trump first ran for office and again in 2020, Putnam said. Meanwhile, Democrats saw an increase in registration when the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, but the party's enrollment rates subsequently cratered. Across the board, in every single category of county, including in all of the places where Democrats have been doing well, Democrats' performance over especially the 6 months before Biden withdrew from the race was just appalling, Putnam said. Like Democrats had never seen such bad numbers. In the week since July 21, when Biden dropped out of the presidential race, Democrats have seen a net increase in their total registered voters each week. However, Republicans and unaffiliated or third-party voters are adding new registrations at an even faster rate. Voters who aren't affiliated with major parties shouldn't be ignored, Putnam says. She attributes at least part of the surge in independence to a change Pennsylvania made last year, in which eligible people at DMVs are now automatically prompted to register to vote instead of having to opt in. Those new people who might not have registered otherwise have been more likely to register as independents, Putnam said. These voters add a new level of unpredictability to Pennsylvania politics, in her opinion. By definition, these are not like votes in the bank for Democrats, but similarly, they're not votes in the bank for Republicans, she said. Those independent voters, I think, are really up for grabs. What's interesting is that when you undertake an extensive voter fortification effort, and then you publicly brag about it, and you get your political opponents really upset, and they start talking about it extensively, the natural expectation is you're going to depress voter enthusiasm. Because outside of the real ideologues, the real passionate believers, the majority of people are just going to be like, man, my vote doesn't even matter anymore. I'm just going to save the time. I'm going to go work for an extra hour or go take my kids to the park or something. A lot of people aren't going to be motivated to vote because of the fortification efforts. So it's another example of how they just, each time they try to escalate things, the blowback against them is even worse than whatever they might gain from escalating. And another interesting story from Pennsylvania, our favorite gigantic retarded ogre, John Fetterman, says Trump's special place in Pennsylvania deepened after the shooting. Senator John Fetterman, Democrat from Pennsylvania, said he thinks former President Trump has a, quote, special place among Pennsylvania voters, and it only deepened after a gunman opened fire at a Trump rally in the state in July. Trump has created a special kind of a hold, and he's remade the party, and he has a special kind of place in Pennsylvania, Fetterman said Thursday to a crowd at the Atlantic Festival, and I think that only deepened after that first assassination attempt. The upcoming election is expected to be a tight race, particularly in the critical battleground state of Pennsylvania. Recent polling has shown Vice President Harris tied with or leading Trump in the state, but Fetterman warned there is real support for Trump there. That support has been unwavering through the former president's impeachments, two apparent assassination attempts, and legal battles. So what's left, Fetterman questioned. I also want people to understand, and it's not science, but there's energy. And there's kinds of anger on the ground in Pennsylvania, and people are very committed and strong, Fetterman said. Trump is going to be strong, and we have to respect that. Fetterman was asked by the Atlantic editor-in-chief Jeffrey Goldberg about what advice he would give to Harris about securing Pennsylvania's election day nears. I'm not going to sit down with the sitting vice president and tell her or say, hey, no, you better, he said. I'm certainly not going to mansplain that to the vice president. She's perfectly capable. He said his advice has been to show up on the campaign trail spreading the Democratic Party's message. I'm showing up in the rooms, and that's my advice, he said. I mean, I'm living my advice. I'm not sitting around saying you should. I'm not going to mansplain that to her. Sounds like a great way for a guy to maintain his cover. Fetterman said he'll be campaigning next week in Butler, Pennsylvania, where the first apparent assassination attempt was made against Trump at one of his rallies. The fucking balls on these people to say apparent assassination attempt. A bullet grazed the former president's ear. 2 event attendees were injured, and 1 was killed. Those rascally bullets out there grazing people's ears. While Fetterman applauded Harris's debate performance and her ability to beat Trump, he noted that former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton outperformed Trump at the 2016 debates and lost the election. With all of the changes and big events during this election cycle, Fetterman argued, we are living in a permanent October surprise. There's not a lot of other things that can happen. I would put Fetterman pretty cleanly in the camp of Democrats who are abandoning or on the cusp of abandoning the party and moving in a generally accepting of Trump direction. Shout out to Screwed Up Rebellion, becoming a channel member. He is now a member of the King Pilled. Welcome, sir. If you too would like to be a member of the King Pilled for just $5 a month, you can also have your name show up in green in the chat. And you get to use the fancy emotes like the Stronks. Oh, it doesn't show up on here. That sucks. Well, if you're watching the YouTube live chat, then you'll see all the emotes of Mike Menser looking like a real man. Okay. A couple videos here from RFK. And then I've got a decent thread here about attempting to put the gay on a war footing from the Black Horse. I've got the Nassim Taleb intolerance of the dictatorship of the small minority, the most intolerant wins. And then a thread on dogs and a video to leave you guys off with. So let's watch these videos from RFK. He was asked what he personally thought about Donald Trump as a person. His answer is quite funny and captures the special relationship he's cultivated with Trump over the years.
Many years, on 2 occasions, I sued him. He was trying to build golf courses up in the New York City reservoir watershed. And I sued him successfully to stop that. At one point, my wife at that time had been trying to find she wanted to go to Palm Beach for the weekend to see my mom over Easter, and I said, I want to buy tickets for all the kids, and she said, what if I find a free ride? And I said, okay.
Oh, well.
I didn't think she was going to do it, but then she said, I found a free ride, and I said, who? And she said, Donald Trump, and I said, I'm suing him. And she said, he told me he knows you're suing him, but it's okay anyway. And we ended up flying down with him, and I had a great time. I still sued him. And, but you know what? After the night that he called me after he got shot, and in Butler, one of the first things he said to me, he said, are you a religious person? And I said, well, I have a deep belief in God and spirituality, which is the central organizing force of my life. And he said, I think I believe in that too now.
And then, here's the other one. Larry Elder asks RFK Jr., do you hold Trump culpable for Operation Warp Speed? This is a hell of a question.
Speaking of President Trump, you've endorsed him for a number of reasons, but he did give us Operation Warp Speed to what degree do you hold him culpable for succumbing to the fear you've talked about?
Well, I absolutely hold him culpable, but here's what, and for a lot of other things, that I disagreed with in the first Trump administration. I didn't like seeing Scott Gottlieb cash in at FDA and Alex Azar running HHS, and oil lobbyists running the Interior Department, coal lobbyists running EPA, telecommunication lobbyists running the FCC, et cetera. I talked to President Trump at length about this, and he said, look, when I got elected in 2016, I didn't know how to govern, and to tell you the truth, it was kind of surprising that we won the election. And he said, I was immediately inundated by lobbyists and business people, and they were all saying, you appoint this guy, appoint that guy, appoint that guy. And he said, I did it, and I wish I hadn't. And he understands that Scott Gottlieb was cashing in, and he did a $100 billion favor for Pfizer, and then went back to work for Pfizer on his board of directors. And so I think that President Trump has said to me that we're going to do something different this time, and that's why he launched the transition team 5 months before he takes power. The last time he did his transition team, he started in January. He's now launched it. I'm on it. Tulsi's on it. Donald Jr. is on it. And, I had an impression that Donald Jr. was kind of a lightweight. But I've gotten to know him, and he's exactly the opposite of that. He's very thoughtful, he's really well informed, and he understands who the bad guys are. He does not like the neocons. He does not like the constant wars. He does not. He wants to restore public health. He loves the environment. He loves the rivers and the streams and the waterways, and he wants to protect those things. And I have nothing but respect for him, and there's a lot of really, really good energy that is part of this transition team now. So,
I thought that was a very interesting admission that he made on behalf of Trump, but it actually reflects something that Trump said, and I want to say it was in his conversation with Theo Vaughn. It may have been when he was talking to Sean Ryan. I can't remember, but he said something comparable, that he was a New York guy. He never really spent much time in D.C. He didn't really know how D.C. worked. And he told about when he and Melania were riding in the presidential limo right after he was inaugurated. And he was just looked over at her and he was like, man, I'm president now. Like, I didn't really buy it when people said that Trump didn't actually expect to win. I got to take a mea culpa on that. It sounds like he said something kind of comparable himself, and RFK is saying it as well. And I don't think that RFK is like saying something Trump didn't say to him. That wouldn't make any sense. If RFK is saying Trump told him that, then I imagine Trump actually told him that he was genuinely surprised to win, which may have been one of the first indicators to him that the polls are fake. He was looking at the polls and taking them seriously, and he was just kind of relating to the world in a similar way to the way Tucker did. Like, Tucker was always just like, oh yeah, it's just the world that I live in. This is how things work, and I just kind of have that. Like, when you exist on Capitol Hill, you just sort of have that mindset. And if you're in the all the business and finance corridors surrounding Washington and New York and London and everything, you just sort of live in this fake world. So Trump winning and the reaction that he got, like, he definitely didn't expect to become the most legendary American in all of history. I mean, he might talk that way and want to be that way, but he had no possible dream that it would ever go the way that it did. And we're seeing a steady drumbeat here, another one of him actually learning from that experience, which to me is heartening. If it was just like he wound up there and, oh yeah, it was some bad people, but this time I'll get the good people and, whatever. But it's more than that. He's like, no, there were people who were actually here trying to subvert me, and those people are my enemies now. Disloyalty is the greatest sin to Trump, personally. So if he appointed people and they weren't loyal to him, then not only is he going to have a problem with those people, he's going to have a problem with the people who told him to appoint them, because now it's reflecting on his own legacy, his own appearance of competence. Doesn't make him look like a big dog if he's taking advice from people who are misleading him, and then he has to suffer the consequences of all of that. So in particular, this point, that this is why he launched the transition team 5 months before he takes power. Last time he did it in January. Now he launched it 5 months ahead of time, and look at the people who are on the transition team. Tulsi, RFK, his own son, JD Vance, and then he's got people like Tucker immediately in his orbit, close advisors to him and his family. We're putting together a team, folks. Okay, job opportunity. For those of you looking for it, Catherine Boyle put this one on my radar. Patriots only. Anduril is hiring. Hiring for a comms manager. Come join this meaningful mission to reboot the arsenal of democracy. Patriots only. A communications manager. Anduril Industries is a defense technology company with a mission to transform U.S. and allied military capabilities with advanced technology. Anduril's family of systems is powered by Lattice OS, an AI-powered operating system that turns thousands of data streams into a real-time 3D command and control center. As the world enters an era of strategic competition, Anduril is committed to bringing cutting-edge autonomy, AI, computer vision, sensor fusion, and networking technology to the military in months, not years. We're looking for a communications manager to join our team. As communications manager, you'll be responsible for tactical execution of Anduril's policy communications, product communications, and industry analyst/influencer relations. Any of you guys out there looking for a job, if you've got the experience, you should go apply with Anduril. I've heard good stuff about their hiring process and their company culture. And note what is missing from the list of requirements here. Who you are: accomplished communications professional with at least 5 to 7 years of experience in corporate communications, media relations, public relations agency, or related fields. Background in product or policy communications preferred. Excellent written and verbal communication skills and a passion for storytelling. Ability to understand and translate complex technical jargon into compelling, easy-to-understand messaging and compelling stories for a variety of audiences. Experience managing analyst relations and influencer programs. Ability to think, plan, and execute on multiple projects simultaneously in an organized fashion. Strong organizational project management analytical skills. Proven capability to manage everything from strategy to details of day-to-day program execution. Willing to flex between higher-level strategy and detailed executional work. Salary range is $114 to $171. Note what is missing, though, from this. No reference to college education. You also got great benefits. And I've heard very good things about working for them, going through the hiring process, their whole company culture. If you want to get in on the startup, the building the US empire startup venture, then here's one of the ways you can do that. If you've got the qualifications, even if you're shooting for the moon, just do it just to get to know the company, just to put your name in the hat and go schmooze with some people. So I'll put the link to this tweet here from Sophia Haft. I'll drop the link to this here with the link to apply in the master thread as soon as I'm finished with this. Go follow me on Twitter at RealKingPill if you want to get access to it. Or you can go to at Sophia Haft, SOFIAHAFT on Twitter, and you can find the link there. Would love to get our guys working for these guys. Colin Ross says, how do I get an ad for people looking for work and to level up? Well, why don't you shoot me a message, sir? You've got a number of ways you can contact me. I would be happy to advertise for our guys looking for people. That is one of the highest callings that I think that we could have here at the Astrolabe. Okay, the Black Horse. He's quoting this article from Metro UK. Fears are mounting of military call-up. Could conscription really return to the UK? He says, attempting to put the gay, the global American empire, the piss drinker for those of you who have been around for a while, attempting to put the gay on a war footing is one of the riskiest possible maneuvers that our current ruling class could possibly attempt. I would suggest that there's a less than 10% chance they could complete such a maneuver and remain in power. Here's why. The first problem would be that they would immediately create a large cast of men with huge incentives to violently defect from the regime. In virtually every case, this has led to large-scale civil unrest. This is one of their problems. If they want to keep fomenting all of these wars all over the place, they are creating the pretext for their own overthrow. because nobody wants to participate in these wars. And the propaganda mechanisms are breaking down. So they want to go start all these wars all over the world. And the act of doing that precludes the people who they need to support them from supporting them. Second, this would involve training and providing military equipment and command structure to their enemies on a massive scale. These organized structures all immediately become a threat to the regime. So if the regime wants to build an army, they have to grapple with the fact that any sort of resources they put into building an army could potentially go to building the exact forces that will overthrow them. Third, this step would profoundly empower the generals as political actors. Successful generals are the natural predators of sclerotic oligarchies at war. Fourth, and most depressingly, our low-caliber elite could very easily lose control of such a conflict, resulting in nuclear war or even simply the breakdown of the complex systems on which modern life depends. This elite will certainly not be king of the ashes. This is getting directly at the point that I've been making, that I don't see the willpower behind the existing elite to sustain themselves and to sustain their coalition as the stakes get higher and higher and higher. Because eventually you're going to hit a decision point where on an individual level, people are going to have to recognize, if I continue to throw my lot in with this cabal, this coalition, this initiative, I'm moving past a point of no return where I have to go all in and I risk turning everything that I own and value to ash. It becomes a Pyrrhic victory. Pyrrhic victory being one where you win, but ultimately the cost of winning is so high that you might as well have lost. The tenor of the crisis, of all these different crises, is getting more and more escalated, more and more existential. So it makes it harder and harder for the valuable foot soldiers to continue buying in, to continue throwing their lot in it, and it makes the other side more and more appealing. Like, I'd rather get demoted than killed, is the sort of thinking. I'd rather take a demotion and stay alive and rule over something than go for the crown and die and rule over nothing. Okay. So now we're going to read this article. It's a long one. It says 27-minute read. I read fast, but it's still going to take a little while to get through this, but it's worthwhile. This is one of the most important. Look, leaving aside the fact that Taleb is a bit of a lolcow, this is one of the most important things that you can get through your head. We're conditioned to think in democratic terms, but human beings are not democratic. And it is the intolerant minorities, the intolerant small minorities, that ultimately turn every single system. So this is a chapter from Taleb's book, Skin in the Game, which is quite good. How Europe will eat halal, why you don't have to smoke in the smoking section, your food choices on the fall of the Saudi king, how to prevent a friend from working too hard, Omar Sharif's conversion, and how to make a market collapse. The best example I know that gives insights into the functioning of a complex system is with the following situation. It suffices for an intransigent minority, a certain type of intransigent minorities, to reach a minutely small level, say 3 or 4% of the total population, for the entire population to have to submit to their preferences. Further, an optical illusion comes with the dominance of the minority. A naive observer would be under the impression that the choices and preferences are those of the majority. If it seems absurd, it's because our scientific intuitions aren't calibrated for that. Forget about scientific and academic intuitions and snap judgments. They don't work, and your standard intellectualization fails with complex systems, though not your grandmother's wisdom. The main idea behind complex systems is that the ensemble behaves in ways not predicted by the components. So the sum is something different than the accumulation of the parts. The sum of the whole becomes something different than a simple addition of all of the parts. The interactions matter more than the nature of the units. Studying individual ants will never, one can safely say never for most such situations, never give us an idea on how the ant colony operates. For that, one needs to understand an ant colony as an ant colony, no less, no more, not a collection of ants. This is called an emergent property of the whole, by which parts and whole differ because what matters is the interactions between such parts. And interactions can obey very simple rules. The rule we discuss in this chapter is the minority rule. The minority rule will show us how it all takes. Okay, starting over again. The minority rule will show us how all it takes is a small number of intolerant, virtuous people with skin in the game in the form of courage for society to function properly. This example of complexity hit me, ironically, as I was attending the New England Complex Systems Institute summer barbecue. As the hosts were setting up the table and unpacking the drinks, a friend who was observant and only ate kosher dropped by to say hello. I offered him a glass of that type of yellow sugared water with citric acid people sometimes call lemonade, almost certain that he would reject it owing to his dietary laws. He didn't. He drank the liquid called lemonade, and another kosher person commented, "Liquids around here are kosher." We looked at the carton container. There was a fine print, a tiny symbol, a U inside a circle, indicating that it was kosher. The symbol will be detected by those who need to know and look for the minuscule print. As to others like myself, I had been speaking prose all these years without knowing, drinking kosher liquids without knowing they were kosher liquids. Here's your little symbol right down here. Criminals with peanut allergies. A strange idea hit me. The kosher population represents less than 0.3% of the residents of the United States, yet it appears that almost all drinks are kosher. Why? Simply because going full kosher allows the producer, grocer, restaurant to not have to distinguish between kosher and non-kosher for liquids, with special markers, separate aisles, separate inventories, different stocking sub-facilities. And the simple rule that changes the total is as follows. A kosher or halal eater will never eat non-kosher or non-halal food, but a non-kosher eater isn't banned from eating kosher. Or, rephrased in another domain, a disabled person will not use the regular bathroom, but a non-disabled person will use the bathroom for disabled people. Granted, sometimes in practice, we hesitate to use the bathroom with the disabled sign on it, owing to some confusion, mistaking the rule for the one for parking cars under the belief that the bathroom is reserved for exclusive use by the handicapped. Someone with a peanut allergy will not eat products that touch peanuts, but a person without such allergy can eat items without peanut traces in them. Which explains why it is so hard to find peanuts on airplanes and why schools are peanut-free, which in a way increases the number of persons with peanut allergies as reduced exposure is one of the causes behind such allergies. Let us apply the rule to domains where it can get entertaining. An honest person will never commit criminal acts, but a criminal will readily engage in legal acts. Let us call such minority an intransigent group, and the majority a flexible one, and the rule is an asymmetry in choices. I once pulled a prank on a friend. Years ago, when Big Tobacco were hiding and repressing the evidence of harm from secondary smoking, New York had smoking and non-smoking sections in restaurants. Even airplanes had, absurdly, a smoking section. I once went to lunch with a friend visiting from Europe. The restaurant only had availability in the smoking sections. I convinced the friend that we needed to buy cigarettes as we had to smoke in the smoking section. He complied. Two more things. First, the geography of the terrain, that is, the spatial structure, matters a bit. It makes a big difference whether the intransigents are in their own district or are mixed with the rest of the population. If the people following the minority rule lived in ghettos with their separate small economy, then the minority rule would not apply. But when a population has an even spatial distribution, say the ratio of such a minority in a neighborhood is the same as that in the village is the same as that in the county in the county is the same as that in state, and that in the state is the same as nationwide, then the flexible majority will have to submit to the minority rule. Second, the cost structure matters quite a bit. It happens in our first example that making lemonade compliant with kosher laws doesn't change the price by much, not enough to justify inventories. But if the manufacturing of kosher lemonade costs substantially more, then the rule will be weakened in some nonlinear proportion to the difference in costs. If it costs 10 times as much to make kosher food, then the minority rule will not apply, except perhaps in some very rich hoods. Muslims have kosher laws, so to speak, but these are much narrower and apply only to meat. For Muslims and Jews have near identical slaughter rules. All kosher is halal for most Sunni Muslims, or was so in past centuries, but the reverse is not true. Note that these slaughter rules are skin-in-the-game driven, inherited from ancient Eastern Mediterranean, Greek and Semitic practice to only worship the gods if one has skin in the game, sacrifice meat to the divinity, and eat what's left. The gods do not like cheap signaling. Now consider this manifestation of the dictatorship of the minority. In the United Kingdom, where the practicing Muslim population is only 3 to 4%, a very high number of the meat we find is halal. Close to 70% of lamb imports from New Zealand are halal. Close to 10% of the chain Subway carry halal-only stores, meaning no pork, in spite of the high costs from the loss of business of non-pork stores. The same holds in South Africa, where, with the same proportion of Muslims, a disproportionately high number of chicken is halal certified. But in the UK and other Christian countries, halal is not neutral enough to reach a high level, as people may rebel against forceful obedience to others' religious norms. For instance, the 7th century Christian Arab poet Al-Akhtal made a point to never eat halal meat in his famous defiant poem boasting his Christianity, "I do not eat sacrificial flesh." Al-Akhtal was reflecting the standard Christian reaction from 3 or 4 centuries earlier. Christians were tortured in pagan times by being forced to eat sacrificial meat, which they found sacrilegious. Many Christian martyrs starved to death. One can expect the same rejection of religious norms to take place in the West as the Muslim populations in Europe grows. Here's a visual depiction of it. Renormalization group. Steps 1 through 3 start from the top. 4 boxes containing 4 boxes, with one of the boxes pink at step 1 with successive applications of the minority rule. So there's 4 boxes in each of these 4 boxes, and you start with the small minority, and it eventually grows till it takes over the whole thing. So the minority rule may produce a larger share of halal foods in the stores than warranted by the proportion of halal eaters in the population, but with a headwind somewhere because some people may have a taboo against Muslim food. But with some non-religious kashrut rules, so to speak, the share can be expected to converge closer to 100% or some high number. In the US and Europe, organic food companies are selling more and more products precisely because of the minority rule, and because ordinary and unlabeled food may be seen by some to contain pesticides, herbicides, and transgenic genetically modified organisms, GMOs, with, according to them, unknown risks. What we call GMOs in this context means transgenic food, entailing the transfer of genes from a foreign organism or species. Or it could be for some existential reasons, cautious behavior or Burkean conservatism. Some may not want to venture too far too fast from what their grandparents ate. Labeling something organic is a way to say that it contains no transgenic GMOs. In promoting genetically modified food via all manner of lobbying, purchasing of congressmen, and overt scientific propaganda with smear campaigns against such persons as yours truly, the big agricultural companies foolishly believed that all they needed was to win the majority. No, you idiots. As I said, your snap scientific judgment is too naive in these type of decisions. Consider that transgenic GMO eaters will eat non-GMOs, but not the reverse. So it may suffice to have a tiny, say no more than 5% of evenly spatially distributed population of non-genetically modified eaters for the entire population to have to eat non-GMO food. How? Say you have a corporate event, a wedding, or a lavish party to celebrate the fall of the Saudi Arabian regime, the bankruptcy of the rent-seeking investment bank Goldman Sachs, or the public reviling of Ray Kocher, chairman of Ketchum, the public relation firm that smears scientists and scientific whistleblowers on behalf of big corporations. Do you need to send a questionnaire asking people if they eat or don't eat transgenic GMOs and reserve special meals accordingly? No. You just select everything non-GMO, provided the price difference is not consequential. And the price difference appears to be small enough to be negligible, as perishable food costs in America are largely, about up to 80 or 90%, determined by distribution and storage, not the cost at the agricultural level. And as organic food and designations such as natural is in higher demand from the minority rule, distribution costs decrease, and the minority rule ends up accelerating in its effects. Big Ag, the large agricultural firms, did not realize that this is the equivalent of entering a game in which one needed to not just win more points than the adversary, but win 97% of the total points just to be safe. It is strange once again to see Big Ag, who spent hundreds of millions of dollars on research come smear campaigns, with hundreds of these scientists who think of themselves as more intelligent than the rest of the population, miss such an elementary point about asymmetric choices. Another example. Do not think that the spread of automatic shifting cars is necessarily due to the majority of drivers initially preferring automatic. It could just be because those who can drive manual shifts can always drive automatic, but the reciprocal is not true. The method of analysis employed here is called renormalization group, a powerful apparatus in mathematical physics that allows us to see how things scale up or down. Let us examine it next, without mathematics. Renormalization group. Figure 2 shows 4 boxes exhibiting what is called fractal self-similarity. Each box contains 4 smaller boxes. Each one of the 4 boxes will contain 4 boxes, and so all the way down and all the way up until we reach a certain level. There are 2 colors, yellow for the majority choice and pink for the minority one. Assume the smaller unit contains 4 people, a family of 4. One of them is in the intransigent minority and eats only non-GMO food, which includes organic. The color of the box is pink and the other yellow. We renormalize once as we move up. The stubborn daughter manages to impose her rule on the 4, and the unit is now all pink, i.e. will opt for non-GMO. Now, step 3, you have the family going to a barbecue party attended by 3 other families. As they are known to only eat non-GMO, the guests will cook only organic. The local grocery store, realizing the neighborhood is only non-GMO, switches to non-GMO to simplify life, which impacts the local wholesaler, and the stories continue and renormalizes. By some coincidence, the day before the Boston barbecue, I was flaneuring in New York, and I dropped by the office of a friend I wanted to prevent from working, that is engaged in an activity that, when abused, causes the loss of mental clarity, in addition to bad posture and loss of definition in the facial features. The French physicist, Serge Gollum, happened to be visiting and chose the friend's office to kill time. Gollum was first to apply these renormalization techniques to social matters and political science. His name was familiar as he is the author of the main book on the subject, which had been sitting for months in an unopened Amazon box in my basement. He introduced me to his research and showed me a computer model of elections by which it suffices that some minority exceeds a certain level for its choices to prevail. So the same illusion exists in political discussions spread by the political scientists. You think that because some extreme right or left-wing party has, say, the support of 10% of the population, that their candidate would get 10% of the votes. No. These baseline voters should be classified as inflexible and will always vote for their faction. But some of the flexible voters can also vote for that extreme faction, just as non-kosher people can eat kosher. And these people are the ones to watch out for, as they may swell the numbers of votes for the extreme party. Gollum's models produce a bevy of counterintuitive effects in political science, and his predictions turned out to be way closer to real outcomes than the naive consensus. All right. The queen is calling. She needs help for me to help her unload the cooler of milk. So I'll be back in 5 minutes, and I'll pick back up here and continue reading through this. And then I have a great thread about dogs, and I'm going to finish off with a beautiful White Boy Summer video. So I'll be back here in just about 5 minutes. Bear with me, folks. Okay. Appreciate you guys being patient. Milk truck just arrived indeed. The veto. The fact we saw from the renormalization group, the veto effect as a person in a group can steer choices. Rory Sutherland suggested that this explains why some fast food chains, such as McDonald's, thrive, not because they offer a great product, but because they're not vetoed in a certain socioeconomic group, and by a small proportion of people in that group at that. To put it in technical terms, it was a best worst case divergence from expectations, a lower variance and lower mean. $10 super chat from Thomas Queries. Appreciate you, man. He says, Amy Erickson proves the point that Taleb is making in this essay. One girl with a preference, 150 people deferred. Well played. That's science. Excellent. We're getting a real-life example right now. When there are few choices, McDonald's appears to be a safe bet. It is also a safe bet in shady places with few regulars where the food variance from expectation can be consequential. I am writing these lines in Milan's central train station, and as offensive as it can be to a visitor from far away, McDonald's is one of the few restaurants there. Shockingly, one sees Italians there seeking refuge from a risky meal. Pizza is the same story. It is commonly accepted food, and outside a fancy party, nobody will be blamed for ordering it. Rory wrote to me about the asymmetry beer-wine and the choices made for parties. Once you have 10% or more women at a party, you cannot serve only beer. But most men will drink wine, so you only need one set of glasses if you serve only wine. The universal donor, to use the language of blood groups. This strategy of the best lower bound might have been played by the Khazars looking to choose between Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. Legend has it that 3 high-ranking delegations, bishops, rabbis, and sheiks, came to make the sales pitch. They asked the Christians, if you were forced to choose between Judaism and Islam, which one would you pick? Judaism, they replied. Then they asked the Muslim, which of the two, Christianity or Judaism? Judaism, the Muslim said. Judaism it was, and the tribe converted. Uh-oh. Lingua franca. If a meeting is taking place in Germany in the Teutonic-looking conference room of a corporation that is sufficiently international or European, and one of the persons in the room doesn't speak German, the entire meeting will be run in English, the brand of inelegant English used in corporations across the world. That way they can equally offend their Teutonic ancestors in the English language. It all started with the asymmetric rule that those who are non-native in English know bad English, but the reverse, English speakers knowing other languages, is less likely. French was supposed to be the language of diplomacy as civil servants coming from aristocratic background used it, while their more vulgar compatriots involved in commerce relied on English. In the rivalry between the two languages, English won as commerce grew to dominate modern life. The victory it has nothing to do with the prestige of France or the efforts of their civil servants in promoting their more or less beautiful Latinized and logically spelled language over the orthographically confusing one of trans-channel meat pie eaters. We can thus get some intuition on how the emergence of lingua franca languages can come from minority rules, and that it is a point that is not visible to linguists. Aramaic is a Semitic language which succeeded Canaanite, that is Phoenician Hebrew, in the Levant and resembles Arabic. It was the language Jesus Christ spoke. The reason it came to dominate the Levant in Egypt isn't because of any particular imperial Semitic power or the fact that they have interesting noses. It was the Persians, who speak an Indo-European language, who spread Aramaic, the language of Assyria, Syria, and Babylon. Persians taught Egyptians a language that was not their own. Simply, when the Persians invaded Babylon, they founded an administration with scribes who could only use Aramaic and didn't know Persian, so Aramaic became the state language. If your secretary can only take dictation in Aramaic, Aramaic is what you will use. This led to the oddity of Aramaic being used in Mongolia, as records were maintained in the Syriac alphabet. Syriac is the Eastern dialect of Aramaic. And centuries later, the story would repeat itself in reverse, with the Arabs using Greek in their early administration in the 7th and 8th centuries. For during the Hellenistic era, Greek replaced Aramaic as the lingua franca in the Levant, and the scribes of Damascus maintained their records in Greek. But it was not the Greeks who spread Greek around the Mediterranean. Alexander, himself not Greek but Macedonian and spoke a different dialect of Greek, did not lead to an immediate deep cultural Hellenization. It was the Romans who accelerated the spreading of Greek as they used it in their administration across the Eastern Empire. A French-Canadian friend from Montreal, Jean-Louis Réault, commented as follows, bemoaning the loss of language of French Canadians outside of narrowly provincial areas. He said, in Canada, when we say bilingual, it is English-speaking, and when we say French-speaking, it becomes bilingual. Decentralize again. Another attribute of decentralization, and one that the intellectuals opposing an exit of Britain from the European Union, Brexit, don't get. If one needs, say, a 3% threshold in a political unit for the minority rule to take its effect, and on average the stubborn minority represents 3% of the population with variations around the average, then some states will be subject to the rule but not others. If, on the other hand, we merged all states in one, then the minority rule will prevail all across. This is the reason the USA works so well as, I've been repeating to everyone who listens, we are a federation, not a republic. To use the language of Anti-Fragile, decentralization is convex to variations. Genes versus languages. Looking at genetic data in the Eastern Mediterranean with my collaborator, the geneticist Pierre Zalua, we noticed that both invaders, Turks and Arabs, left little genes, and in the case of Turkey, the tribes from East and Central Asia brought an entirely new language. Turkey, shockingly, still has the populations of Asia Minor you read about in history books, but with new names. Further, Zalua and his colleagues have shown that Canaanites from 3,700 years ago represent more than 9/10 of the genes of current residents of the state of Lebanon, with only a tiny amount of new genes added in spite of about every possible army having dropped by for sightseeing and some pillaging. While Turks are Mediterraneans who speak an East Asian language, the French, north of Avignon, are largely of Northern European stock, yet they speak a Mediterranean language. So, genes follow majority rules, languages minority rule. Languages travel, genes less so. This shows us the recent mistake to build racial theories on language, dividing people into Aryans and Semites based on linguistic considerations. While the subject was central to the German Nazis, the practice continues today in one form or another, often benign. For the great irony is that Nordic supremacists, Aryan, while anti-Semitic, use the classical Greeks to give themselves a pedigree and a link to a glorious civilization, but don't realize that the Greeks and their Mediterranean Semitic neighbors were actually genetically close to one another. It has been recently shown that both ancient Greeks and Bronze Age Levantines share an Anatolian origin. It just happened that the languages diverged. There is a current controversy in the UK as the Norman left more text and pictures in history books than genes there. That was a reference to the Canaanites representing more than 9/10 of the genes of current residents of the state of Lebanon, with only a tiny amount of new genes added in spite of about every possible army having dropped by for sightseeing and some pillaging. The one-way street of religions. In the same manner, the spread of Islam in the Near East, where Christianity was heavily entrenched, it was born there, can be attributed to two simple asymmetries. The original Islamic rulers weren't particularly interested in converting Christians, as these provided them with tax revenues. The proselytism of Islam did not address those so-called people of the book, i.e. individuals of Abrahamic faith. In fact, my ancestors who survived 13 centuries under Muslim rule saw advantages in not being Muslim, mostly in the avoidance of military conscription. The two asymmetric rules were as follows. First, if a non-Muslim man under the rule of Islam marries a Muslim woman, he needs to convert to Islam. And if either parents of a child happens to be Muslim, the child will be Muslim. Second, becoming Muslim is irreversible, as apostasy is the heaviest crime under the religion sanctioned by the death penalty. The famous Egyptian actor Omar Sharif, born Mikhail Dimitri Shaloub, was of Lebanese Christian origins. He converted to Islam to marry a famous Egyptian actress and had to change his name to an Arabic one. He later divorced but did not revert to the faith of his ancestors. Under these two asymmetric rules, one can do simple simulations and see how a small Islamic group occupying Christian, Coptic Egypt can lead over the centuries to the Copts becoming a tiny minority. All one needs is a small rate of interfaith marriages. Likewise, one can see how Judaism doesn't spread and tends to stay in the minority, as the religion has opposite rules. The mother is required to be Jewish, causing interfaith marriages to leave the community. An even stronger asymmetry than that of Judaism explains the depletion in the Near East of three Gnostic faiths: the Druze, the Yazidi, and the Mandeans. Gnostic religions are those with mysteries and knowledge that is typically accessible to only a minority of elders, with the rest of the members in the dark about the details of the faith. Unlike Islam that requires either parents to be Muslim, and Judaism that asks for at least the mother to have the faith, these three religions require both parents to be of the faith. Otherwise, the person says toodaloo to the community. Egypt has a flat terrain. The distribution of the population presents homogeneous mixtures there, which permits renormalization, i.e. allows for the asymmetric rule to prevail. We saw earlier in the chapter that for kosher rules to work, one needed Jews to be somewhat spread out across the country. But in places such as Lebanon, Galilee, and northern Syria with mountainous terrain, Christians and other non-Sunni Muslims remained concentrated. Christians not being exposed to Muslims experienced no intermarriage. Egypt's Copts suffered from another problem, the irreversibility of Islamic conversions. Many Copts during Islamic rule converted to Islam when it was merely an administrative procedure, something that helps one land a job or handle a problem that requires Islamic jurisprudence. One does not have to really believe in it, since Islam doesn't conflict markedly with Orthodox Christianity. Well, yeah, okay. Little by little, a Christian or Jewish family bearing the Marano-style conversion becomes truly converted, as a couple of generations later, the descendants forget the arrangement of their ancestors. So all Islam did was out-stubborn Christianity, which itself won thanks to its own stubbornness. For, before Islam, the original spread of Christianity in the Roman Empire can be largely seen due to the blinding intolerance of Christians, their unconditional, aggressive, and proselytizing recalcitrance. Roman pagans were initially tolerant of Christians as the tradition was to share gods with other members of the empire. But they wondered why these Nazarenes didn't want to give and take gods and offer that Jesus fellow to the Roman pantheon in exchange for some other gods. What, our gods aren't good enough for them? But Christians were intolerant of Roman paganism. The persecutions of the Christians had vastly more to do with the intolerance of the Christians for the pantheon and local gods than the reverse. What we read is history written by the Christian side, not the Greco-Roman one. Yes, based. We know too little about the Roman side during the rise of Christianity, as hagiographies have dominated the discourse. We have, for instance, the narrative of the martyr St. Catherine, who kept converting her jailers until she was beheaded, except that she may have never existed. There are endless histories of Christian martyrs and saints, but very little about the other side, pagan heroes. All we have is the bit we know about the reversion to Christianity during the Emperor Julian's apostasy and the writings of his entourage of Syrian Greek pagans, such as Libanius Antiochus. Julian had tried to go back to ancient paganism in vain. It was like trying to keep a balloon underwater. And it was not because the majority was pagan, as historians mistakenly think. It was because the Christian side was too unyielding. Christianity had great minds such as Gregorius of Nazianzen and Basil of Caesarea, but nothing to match the great orator Libanius, not even close. My heuristic is that the more pagan, the more brilliant one's mind and the higher one's ability to handle nuances and ambiguity. Purely monotheistic religions, such as Protestant Christianity, Salafi Islam, or fundamentalist atheism, accommodate literalist and mediocre minds that cannot handle ambiguity. Again, we are not claiming that Taleb is not a bit of a lolcow, and I would beef with a significant amount of what he said here about the story of Christians versus Muslims, etc. But in a sense, actually, he's right about this. He just thinks that it's like a distortion, that, this shouldn't have happened this way. When in reality, what he's describing is the inevitability of Christianity. In fact, we can observe in the history of Mediterranean religions, or rather rituals and systems of behavior and belief, a drift dictated by the intolerant, actually bringing the system closer to what we can call a religion. Judaism might have almost lost because of the mother rule and the confinement to a tribal base, but Christianity ruled, and for the very same reasons Islam did. There have been many Islams, the final accretion quite different from the earlier ones. For Islam itself is ending up being taken over in the Sunni branch by the purists simply because these were more intolerant than the rest. The Wahhabis, founders of Saudi Arabia, were the ones who destroyed the shrines and to impose the maximally intolerant rule in a manner that was later imitated by ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, the Levant. Every single accretion of Sunni Islam seems to be there to accommodate the most intolerant of its branches, imposing virtue on others. This idea of one-sidedness can help us debunk a few more misconceptions. How do books get banned? Certainly not because they offend the average person. Most persons are passive and don't really care or don't care enough to request the banning. It looks like from past episodes that all it takes is a few motivated activists for the banning of some books or the blacklisting of some people. The great philosopher and logician Bertrand Russell lost his job at the City University of New York owing to a letter by an angry and stubborn mother who did not wish to have her daughter in the same room as the fellow with dissolute lifestyle and unruly ideas. The same seems to apply to prohibitions, at least the prohibition of alcohol in the United States, which led to interesting mafia stories. Let us conjecture that the formation of moral values in society doesn't come from the evolution of the consensus. No, it is the most intolerant person who imposes virtue on others precisely because of that intolerance. The same can apply to civil rights. An insight as to how the mechanisms of religion and transmission of morals obey the same renormalization dynamics as dietary laws, and how we can show that morality is more likely to be something enforced by a minority. We saw earlier in the chapter the asymmetry between obeying and breaking laws. A law-abiding or rule-abiding fellow always follows the rules, but a felon or someone with looser sets of principles will not always break the rules. Likewise, we discussed the strong asymmetric effects of the halal dietary laws. Let us merge the two. It turns out that in classical Arabic, the term halal has one opposite, haram. Violating legal and moral rules, any rule, is called haram. It is the exact same interdict that governs food intake and all other human behaviors, like sleeping with the wife of the neighbor, lending with interest, without partaking of the downside of the borrower, or killing one's landlord for pleasure. Haram is haram and is asymmetric. From that, we can see that once a moral rule is established, it would suffice to have a small intransigent minority of geographically distributed followers to dictate the norm in society. The sad news, as we will see in the next chapter, is that one person looking at mankind as an aggregate may mistakenly believe that humans are spontaneously becoming more moral, better, more gentle, have better breath when it applies to only a small proportion of mankind. The stability of the minority rule, a probabilistic argument. A probabilistic argument in favor of the minority rule dictating societal values is as follows. Whenever you look across societies and histories, you tend to find the same general moral laws prevailing, with some but not significant variations. Do not steal, at least not from within the tribe. Do not hunt orphans for pleasure. Do not gratuitously beat up passersby for training. Use instead a boxing bag. Unless you are Spartan, and even then you can only kill a limited number of helots for training purposes. And similar interdicts. And we could see these rules evolving over time to become more universal, expanding to a broader set, to progressively include slaves, other tribes, other species, animals, economists, etc. And one property of these laws, they are black and white, binary, discrete, and allow no shadow. You cannot steal a little bit or murder moderately. You cannot keep kosher and eat just a little bit of pork on Sunday barbecues. Now, it would be vastly more likely that these values emerge from a minority than the majority. Why? Take the following two theses. Outcomes are paradoxically more stable under the minority rule. The variance of the results is lower, and the rule is more likely to emerge independently across populations. Think of elite theory. What emerges from the minority rule is more likely to be black and white. An example. Consider that an evil person wants to poison the collective by putting some product into soda cans. He has two options. The first is cyanide, which obeys a minority rule. A drop of poison, higher than a small threshold, makes the entire liquid poisonous. The second is a majority-style poison. It requires more than half the liquid to be poisonous in order to kill. Now look at the inverse problem, a collection of dead people after a dinner party, and you need to investigate the cause. The local Sherlock Holmes would assert that conditional on the outcome that all people drinking the soda have been killed, the evil man opted for the first, not the second option. Simply, the majority rule leads to fluctuations around the average with a high rate of survival. The black and white character of these societal laws can be explained with the following. Assume that under a certain regime, when you mix white and dark blue in various combinations, you don't get variations of light blue, but dark blue. Such a regime is vastly more likely to produce dark blue than another rule that allows more shades of blue. Popper's paradox. I was at a large multi-table dinner party, the kind of situation where you have to choose between the vegetarian risotto and the non-vegetarian option, when I noticed that my neighbor had his food catered, including silverware, on a tray reminiscent of airplane fare. The dishes were sealed with aluminum foil. He was evidently ultra-kosher. It did not bother him to be seated with prosciutto eaters who, in addition, mix butter and meat in the same dishes. He just wanted to be left alone to follow his own preferences. For Jews and Muslim minorities such as Shiites, Sufis, and associated religions such as Druze and Alawis, the aim is for people to leave them alone so they can satisfy their own dietary preferences, largely with historical exceptions here and there. But had my neighbor been a Sunni Salafi, he would have required the entire room to be eating halal. Perhaps the entire building, perhaps the entire town, hopefully the entire country, hopefully the entire planet. Instead, given the total lack of separation between church and state and between the holy and the profane, to him, haram, the opposite of halal, means literally illegal. The entire room was committing a legal violation. As I'm writing these lines, people are disputing whether the freedom of the enlightened West can be undermined by the intrusive policies that would be needed to fight fundamentalists. As I'm writing these lines, people are disputing whether the freedom of the enlightened West can be undermined by the intrusive policies that would be needed to fight Salafi fundamentalists. Clearly, can democracy, by definition the majority, tolerate enemies? The question is as follows. Would you agree to deny the freedom of speech to every political party that has in its charter the banning the freedom of speech? Let's go one step further. Should a society that has elected to be tolerant be intolerant about intolerance? This is, in fact, the incoherence that Kurt Gödel, the Grand Master of Logical Rigor, detected in the Constitution while taking the naturalization exam. Legend has it that Gödel started arguing with the judge, and Einstein, who was his witness during the process, saved him. I wrote about people with logical flaws asking me if one should be skeptical about skepticism. I used a similar answer as Popper when asked if one could falsify falsification. We can answer these points using the minority rule. Yes, an intolerant minority can control and destroy democracy. Actually, as we saw, it will eventually destroy our world. So we need to be more than intolerant with some intolerant minorities. It is not permissible to use American values or Western principles in treating intolerant Salafism, which denies other people's right to have their own religion. The West is currently in the process of committing suicide. The irreverence of markets and science. Now consider markets. We can say that markets aren't the sum of market participants, but price changes reflect the activities of the most motivated buyer and seller. Yes, the most motivated rules. Indeed, this is something that only traders seem to understand. Traders, Traders. Why a price can drop by 10% because of a single seller. All you need is a stubborn seller. Markets react in a way that is disproportional to the impetus. The overall stock markets represent currently more than $30 trillion, but a single order in 2008, only $50 billion, that is less than 0.2% of the total, caused them to drop by close to 10%, causing losses of around $3 trillion. It was an order activated by the Parisian bank, Societe Generale, who discovered a hidden acquisition by a rogue trader and wanted to reverse the purchase. Why did the market react so disproportionately? Because the order was one way, stubborn. There was a desire to sell, but no way to change one's mind. My personal adage is, the market is like a large movie theater with a small door. And the best way to detect a sucker, say the usual finance journalist, is to see if his focus is on the size of the door or on that of the theater. Stampedes happen in cinemas, say when someone shouts fire, because those who want to be out do not want to stay in, exactly the same unconditionality we saw with kosher observance. Science acts similarly. We will return later with a discussion of how the minority rule is behind Karl Popper's approach to science. But let us for now discuss the more entertaining Feynman. What do you care what other people think is the title of a book of anecdotes by the great Richard Feynman, the most irreverent and playful scientist of his day. As reflected in the title of the book, Feynman conveys in it the idea of the fundamental irreverence of science, acting through a similar mechanism as the kosher asymmetry. How? Science isn't the sum of what scientists think, but exactly as with markets, a procedure that is highly skewed. Once you debunk something, it is now wrong. That is how science operates, but let's ignore disciplines such as economics and political science that are more like pompous entertainment. Had science operated by majority consensus, we would be still stuck in the Middle Ages, and Einstein would have ended as he started, a patent clerk with fruitless side hobbies. Alexander said it was preferable to have an army of sheep led by a lion to an army of lions led by a sheep. Alexander, or no doubt he who produced this probably apocryphal saying, understood the value of the active, intolerant, and courageous minority. Hannibal terrorized Rome for a decade and a half with a tiny army of mercenaries, winning 22 battles against the Romans, battles in which he was outnumbered each time. He was inspired by a version of this maxim. At the Battle of Cannae, he remarked to Gisco, who complained that the Carthaginians were outnumbered by the Romans, "There is one thing that's more wonderful than their numbers. In all that vast number, there is not one man called Gisco. Una sed leo, only one but a lion." This large payoff from stubborn courage is not just in the military. The entire growth of society, whether economic or moral, comes from a small number of people. So we close this chapter with a remark about the role of skin in the game and the condition of society. So society doesn't evolve by consensus, voting, majority, committees, verbose meetings, academic conferences, and polling. Only a few people suffice to disproportionately move the needle. All one needs is an asymmetric rule somewhere, and asymmetry is present in about everything. So it was long, but hopefully you guys see how valuable these insights are and why, as you're considering various events that are happening and the awakening of the normies, don't focus on the majority of people. Don't focus on the majority opinions. Look for the intolerant minorities, the intransigent minorities, the minorities who plant their flag and establish a rule and will not be moved. They become the locus of the society. Everyone else moves around them. They define the rule. And as Josh says here, I'm hearing a lot of words to say Christendom needs to be more intolerant against evil. Yes. Okay. 2 more things here for you guys. One of them is a callback to 9/11. We love our dogs, don't we, folks? I'm going to see if I can make it through this one. We do not deserve dogs. It was the dogs. The dogs are what got me. A few years ago, we visited the 9/11 Memorial Museum, and we saw a lot. Twisted steel girders, baby-faced portraits of the deceased, mutilated emergency vehicles. But it was the dogs that wrecked me. The dog exhibit is pretty small, located in the far corner of the museum with photographs of search and rescue dogs. You see dogs nosing through rubble wearing safety harnesses. You see them in their prime. They're all deceased now, but they were spectacular. There was Riley, golden retriever. He was trained to find living people, but he didn't find any. Instead, he recovered the remains of firefighters. Riley kept searching for a live survivor, but found none. His morale tanked. I tried my best to tell Riley he was doing his job, said his handler. He had no way to know that when firefighters and police officers came over to hug him, and for a split second you can see them crack a smile, that Riley was succeeding at doing an altogether different job. He provided comfort. Or maybe he did know. There was Kobe and Guinness, black and yellow labs from California, surfer dogs. They found dozens of human remains. And Abigail, golden lab, happy, energetic, committed, big fan of bacon. Sage, a border collie, cheerful, endless energy. Her first mission was searching the Pentagon wreckage after the attacks. She recovered the body of the terrorist who piloted American Airlines Flight 77. Jenner, black lab. At age 9, he was one of the oldest dogs in the scene. Jenner's handler, Ann Wickman, remembers, it was 12 to 15 stories high of rubble and twisted steel. My first thought was, I can't send Jenner into that. At one point, Jenner disappeared down a hole under the rubble, and I was like, such a heart-stopping moment. Tracker, German Shepherd, tireless worker, worked until he couldn't stand up anymore. Tracker found Janelle Guzman McMillan, who was trapped for 27 hours among the debris. Janelle was as good as dead until the cold nose poked through the mangled steel. Apollo, German Shepherd, an NYPD police dog, coal black muzzle, liquid eyes. The first dog on the scene only 15 minutes after the attacks. Apollo worked 18-hour days. Once he was nearly killed in a fire during his search, but Apollo had been drenched in water and he was quick on his feet. No injuries. Jake, Labrador. As a puppy, Jake was found on the side of the road in Dallas, abandoned, left for dead, like trash. He had a dislocated hip and a broken leg. They made him a rescue dog. Jake worked until his body threatened to collapse from exhaustion. After his shifts, local New York merchants saw his rescue dog vest and treated him to free steak dinners in upscale Manhattan restaurants. Look at the good dog. And of course, there was Britannia. Golden retriever, easygoing, dutiful, obsessed with food. Her owner and trainer, Denise Corliss, a firefighter from Harris County, Texas, brought Britannia to ground zero while the rubble was still hot. Britannia went straight to work. She worked for 10 days solid, 10 agonizing days. Britannia never quit. She napped on site. Denise recalls, there are images of Britannia going to where she was directed to search, into the unknown, the chaotic environment. But even then, she knew who needed the comfort of a dog and which firefighter needed to hold her close and stroke her fur. After 9/11, Britannia also helped recovery efforts during the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina and Ivan. She retired at age 9. Old age finally overtook her. She had a hard time using stairs, so Denise installed an above-ground pool to keep Britannia's joints limber. In retirement, Britannia became a reading dog at a local elementary school. First graders, too shy to read aloud, would read to a white-faced elderly retriever who looked them in the eyes and smiled. Britannia visited students with special needs. She visited students with autism. She visited everyone. She suffered kidney failure at age 16. She was put to sleep on June 7, 2016, and became the last of the 9/11 rescue dogs to end her earthly career. Britannia hobbled into the Cypress, Texas Animal Hospital one sunny Monday, only to discover the sidewalks and hallways were lined with firefighters, first responders, and rescue workers who saluted her. Her remains were later escorted from the hospital draped in an American flag. We do not deserve dogs. Go love on your doggos, folks. All right. Now, I'm going to yank your guys' chain. After giving you that one, I'm going to give you this one from Samuel Holden. Good morning. I made this video to encourage the brothers and remind them, especially on a day like this, that we will have our home again. God smiled down on us this summer. May we thank him for his mercies.
Our priority will be Black, Latino, Asian, and Native American-owned small businesses, women-owned businesses.
What do you say to the people who dragged a poor white guy out of a car and beat him?
Oh my goodness, poor white people, please.
How we are going to exterminate white people.
This is the part where the white people start to applaud. Oh.
The National Park Service says the persistent whiteness of its 419 parks is an existential crisis.
We're witnessing the end of white America as we know it.
You know, whites will not be the majority. I mean, it's an exciting transformation of the country.
And white Americans will soon be a minority, and that's great. Our only spice is potato.
I want to understand white rage, and I'm white.
many days fell away with nothing to show.
Pat Tillman, who gave up a multi-million-dollar contract in professional football, has been killed.
And the walls kept tumbling down in the city that we love.
People jumping from the top of the World Trade Center.
Great clouds roll over the hills, bringing darkness from above. But if you close your eyes, does it almost feel like nothing changed at all? And if you close your eyes, does it almost feel like you've been here before? How am I gonna be an optimist about this? How am I gonna be an optimist about this? But if you close your eyes, does it almost feel like nothing changed at all? And if you close your eyes, does it almost feel like you've been here before? How am I gonna be an optimist about this? How am I gonna be an optimist about this? We were caught up and lost in all of our vices. In your pose as the dust settled around us, and the walls kept tumbling down in the city that we love. Great clouds roll over the hills, bringing darkness from above. But if you close your eyes, does it almost feel like nothing changed at all? And if you close your eyes, does it almost feel like you've been here before? How am I gonna be an optimist about this? How am I gonna be an optimist about this? Oh, where do we begin? The rubble or our sins?
Please, God, let me live again.
Oh, where do we begin? The rubble or our sins? And the walls kept tumbling down in the city that we love. Great clouds roll over the hills, bringing darkness from above. But if you close your eyes, does it almost feel like nothing changed at all? And if you close your eyes, does it almost feel like you've been here before? Oh, how am I gonna be an optimist about this? How am I gonna be an optimist about this? If you close your eyes, does it almost feel like nothing changed at all?
Absolute banger. An anthem. These are our people. Go make some white babies. I'm gonna be bold enough to say that I'm proud to be white, and I love white people culture. I absolutely love it. Thank you for showing up here today, guys. Appreciate you hanging out in the live chat, commenting, the super chats, all the good vibes. You guys are the best. Go join the Kingpill Discord, kingpill.com. We're going to have a Schizo stream tonight, about 8 p.m. Central Time. We'd love to have you be a part of it with us. And I'll be back on Monday with another episode of the Astrolabe. Go follow me on Twitter, @RealKingPilled. Like the stream on your way out. We still got 123 watching. You guys stuck it through the Taleb essay. You guys are the elites. 88 likes, though. So do me a favor on the way out. Hit that like button. Let's get it over 100. before we end. And I will give you guys Hulk.
They're my hero. And they tried to kill the next president of the United States. Enough was enough. And I said, let Trumpomania run wild, brother. Let Trumpomania rule again. Let Trumpomania